directly to statements by members. Déclaration des députés, the Honourable Member for Regina Leuven.
Mr. Speaker, 86 years ago this month, the Parliamentary Caucus of a new political party was formed. The Cooperative Commonwealth Federation went on to adopt its policy manifesto in Regina. The CCF was a farmer-labor coalition. A current issue that engages farm and labor interests is the elimination of the Saskatchewan Transportation Company. It provided good unionized jobs for bus operators, as well as a needed service for rural communities. In a member's statement a year ago, I warned that the rushed elimination of STC violated the Canada Labour Code's notice provisions. Yesterday, news broke that a federal arbitrator confirmed this violation and ordered the province to compensate its former employees. That's a good start, but I will continue to fight for Saskatchewan's fair share of federal transit funding to restore bus service between our communities. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Saint Boniface, Saint Vital.
On May 20th, our Franco-Manitoban weekly newspaper, La Liberté, will celebrate its 105th anniversary. La Liberté has won many national awards, including the Canadian Community Newspaper Awards, and it is a national leader. But it is its role in the community that really stands out. Its partnership with Franco-Manitoban and Louis Riel school districts, and its sections dans nos écoles, or in our schools, gives us a window into inspiring future generations. Other reports shed light on our diverse and thriving Francophone organizations. La Liberté gives a unique perspective on our history and our community. Our newspaper isn't just a French version of the news of the day. Rather, it's a reflection of our Francophone community in all its forms and in all of its richness. Happy anniversary to La Liberté.
Honourable Member for Battle River, Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, coal-fired electricity and coal mining has been a mainstay of many regional economies in Alberta over the last 60 years. Forsberg and Hanna, two important communities in my riding, are perfect examples. 60% of Forsberg's economy is based on the coal industry, with many employed either at the Battle River mine or the power plant. Hanna's economy is tied to Sheerness, where 200-plus people work at the generation station or mine. The phasing out of these industries will have significant ramifications. It is imperative that the transition plan involve local workers and communities. Unfortunately, the Liberal government thinks otherwise, and that is why the newly announced Just Transition Task Force has only 1 in 11 members affected Alberta communities, while there are 5 from Ontario. We need local people to help solve local challenges. I implore this government to change the composition of this task force to include representatives of Hanna, Forsberg, and other affected areas in decisions that will impact their livelihoods and the survival of their communities.
Right on. The Honourable Member for London North Centre.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to rise and highlight National Nursing Week. In my community of London, Ontario, we are incredibly privileged to have a significant number of dedicated and talented healthcare professionals. Whether it's London Health Sciences Centre, St. Joseph's Healthcare, the London Middlesex Health Unit, the Victorian Order of Nurses, long-term care facilities, or any of the other locations where nurses work every day, we can rest assured that they will be there to provide care in our most vulnerable of moments. To all nurses from coast to coast to coast, please know your work is truly appreciated. We are grateful that you are always present to provide world-class care, as well as advocate for the needs of your patients. The profession has significantly evolved since the days of nursing pioneer Florence Nightingale, and therefore I challenge all Canadians to learn more about the important work nurses undertake and the challenges of their ever-changing roles. To the nurses of London and to of Canada, you have my sincere appreciation and utmost respect. Our communities are better off because of your tireless work and dedication. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, some people inspire us by changing the world around them through their courage, determination, and tenacity. In a face-off that could be compared to David and Goliath, Claudie Briand from Trois-Rivières has managed to expand the eligibility criteria for a compensation program for victims of thalidomide. The judge even wrote, The request is accepted, the Crawford decision is invalidated, and a statement has been made that the policies are almost flagrantly unreasonable. End of the quote. Thank you, Ms. Briand, for having led the fight, having achieved this result, and allowed others to benefit from these upcoming changes. I supported you as best I could, and now you have given me the tools I need to help other victims of thalidomide in Trois-Rivières and also across the country. Ms. Briand, you have the admiration of your fellow constituents and of myself. Please accept this public statement as a mark of recognition of your great work. The Honourable Member for Ville-Marie, le Sud-Ouest Île Sœur. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Sunday, families across Canada will gather to celebrate Mother's Day. I'd like to take a few moments to pay tribute to all the mothers, grandmothers, godmothers, aunts, and any women who are mentors to a young person. And most of all, the mother of my children and my own mother.
Everyone in this House makes a lot of money, Mr. Speaker, some more than others, so there's no excuse to miss Mother's Day or to get some flowers or chocolates. If you need recommendations in the Ottawa area or the Montreal area, give me a call. But more importantly, and I hope this statement gathers wide support from this House on this Mother's Day, let's not only celebrate mothers, but continue our work to give mothers the respect they deserve, to fight for the equality of women, and to provide all parents with the tools they need to support them in doing the most important job, raising the next generation of leaders.
Hear, hear. Honourable Member for Kamloops, Thompson-Carriby.
Mr. Speaker, a little less than 10 years ago, a whirlwind blew into the other place. My good friend and great Canadian Nancy Greenrain was honoured to accept the offer of a Senate appointment and start a new chapter in her life. Nancy brought commitment, energy, dedication, and passion to this new role. These are the same distinct qualities that brought her success both as an Olympian and as an entrepreneur. Nancy has clearly made her mark on Parliament Hill, whether it was fighting to preserve iconic lighthouses on the West Coast, spearheading a comprehensive health and fitness regime on the Hill, or looking for solutions to the obesity crisis in our youth. Ministers, both Conservative and Liberal, learned that she was dogged in her determination to make a difference. It is hard to believe that she's moving on to her next adventure, and I would like to ask the House to join me in thanking her for all she continues to give to Canada. We will miss her.
The Honourable Member for Winnipeg South.
Mr. Speaker, this Saturday marks the 148th birthday of Canada's Keystone Province, Manitoba. Manitoba's geography is one of the most unique and diverse in Canada, from the Arctic tundra near Churchill to the spirit sands of the Carberry Desert to vast prairies and beautiful boreal forests. Our provincial treasure, Lake Winnipeg, is the world's 10th largest freshwater lake. Home of the Winnipeg Jets and the curling capital of the world, Manitoba is also proud to host the Canadian Museum for Human Rights and the National Microbiology Laboratory. Our prairie province, the birthplace of Louis Riel, is the homeland of the Métis Nation and encompasses the traditional territories of over 60 First Nations. Manitobans have a rich history of welcoming people from around the world, creating a vibrant multicultural mosaic that reflects the best of who we are as Canadians. So, Mr. Speaker, on May 12th, let us wish all Manitobans a very happy Manitoba Day.
Happy Manitoba Day. The Honourable Member for King Vaughan.
Mr. Speaker, this is a wonderful time of year, not only because it's spring and warmth has finally returned to one of the coldest capitals in the world, it's also the time that grade 8 students from across the country travel to Ottawa to experience Parliament in action and to explore the nation's capital. I've talked to many of my colleagues on both sides of the House, and they've shared with me that welcoming students to the Hill, sharing their stories, and hopefully inspiring the next generation of leaders to one day seek a seat in the House is the highlight of their day. I would like to specifically welcome the grade 8 students from Nobleton Senior Public School who are visiting Ottawa today. This week, Nobleton Senior is recognizing Mental Health Week, an initiative reminding students of the importance of a school-life balance. To the grade 8 class of Nobleton Senior and to the classes visiting Parliament this year, bienvenue, welcome.
The Honourable Member for Chatham-Kent Leamington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My riding at Chatham-Kent Leamington has over 150 kilometres of shoreline. This April, this shoreline was struck by a severe spring storm. The heavy rain and high winds caused widespread flooding and accelerated the pre-existing erosion, causing many of my constituents at severe risk. Over the past weeks, I visited Pelee Island, Erie Shore Drive, Cottery Park, and Pulley Road to better appreciate the scope and devastation firsthand. I was shocked to see how destructive a single storm could be. 3-ton boulders were literally tossed about like stones. On Peely Island, the dike road is exposed after the armor stone was pulled into the lake by the storm, exposing the roadbed completely to the elements. A breach would cause the center of the island, which sits 9 feet below current lake levels in some locations, to flood. I've reached out to the Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, but as of yet have not been advised of any funding. Mr. Speaker, my constituents have a hard time understanding how this government can spend $6 million to build a temporary ice rink, but has no money for their safety and the protection of their property.
Good point. Here. Honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Mr. Speaker, on a recent trip to Halifax, I had the honour of visiting Pier 21, the same place that 60 years earlier my mother and her family first touched ground in Canada. At just 19 years old, Vincenza Amante arrived at Pier 21 after travelling some 6,000 kilometres by land and sea. My mother left behind the warm familiarities of southern Italy to start a new life in northern British Columbia.
Like many immigrants, my mother arrived with little money, little education, and she spoke neither English nor French.
Mr. Speaker, Canada's social fabric has been woven by immigrants who, like my mother, came to Canada with a set of values to work hard and to remember your heritage. I would like to thank my mother for her courage and her sacrifices. With Mother's Day only a few days away, I wish her and my wife Rose and all the mothers a wonderful and well-deserved Mother's Day. Abbraccio, mamma. Ti voglio bene assai. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Fleetwood Port Kells.
Mr. Speaker, on May 16th, at the first sight of the crescent moon, our Muslim community will begin the month-long observance of Ramadan, marking the first revelation of the Quran to Muhammad. During Ramadan, adults in good health fast from sunrise to sunset to redirect their thoughts away from the world and to the spirit. To maintain the spiritual reward for this, Muslims also turn away from false speech, refraining from insults and making malicious comments about people. Could it be, Mr. Speaker, that we could all benefit by observing Ramadan here in this place? But if that and fasting is a little too much to ask, there's something else. Ramadan is a time of generosity, and on that score, I'd like to propose that all of us here be Muslim for a month by setting aside $1 a day or more from May 16th to June 14th, and to celebrate Eid al-Fitr, the end of Ramadan, donate it all to your nearest food bank. Then we can truly look at each other and say, Ramadan Mubarak.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, on May 14th, 1948, Israel became an independent nation-state. Born of war, its short history as a state is one of more challenges to its sovereignty than maybe any other in the same time frame. Facing opposition to their very existence, Israelis built a shining light of pluralism, democracy, and freedom in a hostile and conflict-torn region. There aren't words strong enough to describe Israel's resilience. Canada's conservatives stand with Israel under attack by Iran. Israel's people are innovative and entrepreneurial, pioneers of technological advances that help millions every day, with countless achievements from mathematics to medicine to cybersecurity and small but crucial inventions taken for granted like the USB flash drive. The world is better because of Israel. Allies must not waver. At once a young nation and a people since the beginning of time, from Eilat to the Golan Heights and Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, that high-tech and holy land always overcomes unimaginable adversity. Israel deserves independence, peace, prosperity, and free belief forever. Congratulations on 70 years of independence, Israel.
The Honourable Member for La Sarre, Aymar Verdun. Mr. Speaker, on June 30th, 2017, the Governor-General of Canada announced 99 new Order of Canada appointments. These included my friend, Marguerite Mendel. As her appointment ceremony unfolds this morning, I would like to take the time to pay tribute to her.
Economist and teacher at Concordia University, Professor Mendel shares her career and work between university research in the field of social economics and its practice by engaging with numerous community organizations.
While mainstream thinking views the free market as the only path to profitability, Ms. Mendel proposes a different model: social economics. which aims to reconcile economic activity and social fairness.
Speaker for her contributions to social and economic innovation and her research to develop innovative tools and policy levers to reduce poverty, Marguerite Mendel is a truly worthy recipient of the Order of Canada. Congratulations, Margie. Brava.
The Honourable Member for Esquimalt, Saanich Sooke.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to mark the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia on May 17th, and the urgent need to combat hatred, discrimination against the LGBTQ community here at home and around the world. While Canadian law now guarantees equal rights to all LGBTQ2 Canadians, on the ground things are still quite different. Trans rights guaranteed in Bill C-16 still haven't been fully implemented. The gay blood ban remains in place. Discrimination and violence remain all too common. In 113 countries, members of my community have no legal protection from discrimination. In over 77 countries, we face lengthy prison sentences, violence, and even death because of who we are, world stage for the universal values of equality, inclusion, and respect. I call on all members of Parliament to work together towards the elimination of all forms of homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia. Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Lethbridge.
Canadians elect MPs to represent their interests and their concerns in the House of Commons. Among other things, Canadians elect us to prioritize their safety and security, to defend the vulnerable, and to create laws that put the rights of victims before those of criminals. Which is why it's extremely alarming to those of us on this side of the House to see the Prime Minister pandering to criminals rather than protecting victims. Bill C-75 reduces penalties for a long list of very serious crimes, including participating in a terrorist group, trafficking women and girls, committing violence against a clergy member, murdering a child within 1 year of birth, abducting a child, forcing marriage, advocating for genocide, and participating in organized crime. Mr. Speaker, Conservatives believe the safety of Canadians should be the #1 priority of every government, and we will continue to speak up and speak out for those who are affected. We believe that the values portrayed within C-75 are both deceptive and damaging, and we will continue to advocate on behalf of Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Pickering Uxbridge.
Mr. Speaker, our Liberal government will always stand up for women's rights, regardless of what the Conservatives think or say. Yesterday in the House of Commons, the Conservative member for Provencher shouted that a woman's right to choose is not a right.
Shame.
Women and women alone have the right to choose what they do with their bodies. This is the foundation of gender equality.
Hear, 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 hear.
It has been 30 years since the Supreme Court of Canada affirmed a woman's right to choose. It's time for the Conservative Party to recognize that. Our government unequivocally supports women's rights to decide what to do with their bodies, and we are always going to stand up for that right. Why won't the Conservatives stand up for the right to choose?
Hear, hear, hear.
Oral questions. Questions orales. L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Richmond, Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, yesterday we learned that the government was prepared to legalize marijuana before Bill C-46 on impaired driving is adopted. And that despite the advice of experts, doctors, provinces, police officers. The Prime Minister is endangering public safety in Canada. My question for the Prime Minister is simple. Can he reassure Canadians that he will not give the go-ahead to legalizing marijuana until all police officers in Canada are equipped and trained to deal with drug-impaired driving? The Honourable Minister. Yesterday, the member for Provencher said that the right for a woman to choose is not a right.
From Provencher stated that a woman's right to choose is not a right. The Supreme Court upheld this right more than 30 years ago today. These comments serve to take women's rights backwards. Will the Leader of the Opposition please denounce the comments from his caucus and clearly voice his support right now for a woman's right to choose?
Will the Leader of the Opposition denounce the comments of his caucus and support a woman's right to choose? The Honourable Member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The comments were made outside of this House, and I'll come back to this question period. Following legalization, deadly accidents caused by drivers who used marijuana doubled in Washington, tripled in Colorado. That is a very serious issue that we need to consider here in this House, Mr. Speaker. We're talking about human lives. Can the Prime Minister give his word that legalization will not proceed until all police officers in Canada are equipped and trained to deal with this plague? The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Disappointing that the party opposite still believes that women's rights are not human rights. Yesterday, this belief was on full display when the member from Provencher claimed that the women's right to choose is not a right. Will the member opposite please stand up for women everywhere and make it clear that women's right to choose is clearly a right?
The Honourable Member for Richmond Arthabaska.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, the facts are clear. Following legalization of marijuana, deadly accidents. Well, here, in fact, is what was contained in the report by the Police Association of Police Chiefs. Drug-impaired driving is a top concern for police in Canada. The problem already exists and will become even worse with legalization. So for the third time, I will repeat my question, and I hope that the Prime Minister will have the courage to stand up and answer. Will he ensure that all police officers in Canada will be equipped and trained to counter The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The previous government's approach to cannabis didn't work. It enabled criminals to move ahead. We respect the work done by the Senate, and we are eager to consider the report that will come from them. The government will continue to collaborate with its partners to ensure that the transition will take place.
Norfolk.
Well, Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Liberals said that they would legalize marijuana without having drug-impaired driving laws in effect. So, Mr. Speaker, with the inability for a roadside test for cannabis use, can the minister please inform this House just how this Liberal government intends to keep Canadians safe on our roads?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, the problem of drug-impaired driving exists today. It's not a problem that will spring to life next week or next month or next year. It exists today. That's why it is so very important to pass Bill C-46. I'm glad to hear the official opposition is now fully in support of Bill C-46, and I hope they will join us in encouraging the Senate to deal with it expeditiously.
Honourable Member for Haldeman from Norfolk.
Well, Mr. Speaker, obviously there's no plan, but really that's no surprise. And while the Liberals have made it clear that they want to have pot legalized by the summer, the Minister for Justice has always said that when marijuana is legalized, there would be laws to protect Canadians on the roads. That's why they're bringing in new ones. So why won't the Minister delay the legalization of pot until these protections are in place?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, the Criminal Code already has provisions to deal with drug-impaired driving. Those provisions have been in the law for many years. What we are trying to do is to enhance and strengthen those provisions with what we're adding in Bill C-46. New offences, new technology, and new procedures to add to what is already in the Criminal Code. So again, I thank the opposition for officially endorsing Bill C-46, and we're anxious for them to join with us in encouraging the Senate to pass it promptly.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquet-Angers. Mr. Speaker, the Kinder Morgan saga is getting more interesting. Not only are shareholders asking for more information on environmental standards, we've discovered that Kinder Morgan had direct access to the Prime Minister and the Minister of Natural Resources to advance the project. What a surprise, Mr. Speaker. Kyle Marsh, a lobbyist for Kinder Morgan, participated in at least 3 fundraising activities by the Liberal Party, even though the Liberals had promised to deny access to lobbyists to their fundraising activities. So my question is simple. Will they finally tell the truth and admit that Kinder Morgan has had direct access since the beginning? The Honourable Minister of the Environment. Our party recognizes that the economy and the environment go hand in hand. this is an important part for Canada. The Conservatives didn't acknowledge that the environment was important, and the NDP does not acknowledge how important the economy is. We know that the two go together. We focus on that every day. We are protecting the environment and ensuring that our natural resources get to market. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquet-Angers. Mr. Speaker, money and the economy go together. I don't think the Liberals understand just how serious this is for public confidence. Is that the price to pay to buy the attention of the Prime Minister and his government? Donations, fundraising dinners, is that what companies have to pay to get favors from this Liberal government? How can people have confidence in the government? How can the Prime Minister explain the difference between what he says and what he actually does? The Honourable Minister of Transport. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, the NDP has never understood that the environment and the economy go together. This project is important. It is in the national interest. Now, when I say it's in the national interest, I mean that it's in the interest of the entire country, not just Alberta and BC, but the entire country. We acknowledge that it is an important project, and we are going to proceed by ensuring that the 157 conditions attached to the project are complied with.
Skeena of Oakley Valley.
Anyone remember the Liberal promise to end the cash for access fiasco? The minister said at the time it's always possible to raise the bar. No kidding. The only question in this game of Liberal ethical limbo is how low will they go? It turns out after banning lobbyists from attending Liberal fundraisers, lobbyists from Kinder Morgan attended 3 Liberal fundraisers for the Prime Minister and Finance Minister. Now, why would the Liberals take a bunch of money from a Kinder Morgan lobbyist, and how can they expect Canadians not to believe this is simply buying access to the Liberal Party?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, our party understands that the environment and the economy go together. We understand that the TMX project is a good project. There are 157 conditions attached to this project. We're also taking serious action on climate change. We get it. Unfortunately, we have one party that doesn't understand how important the environment is, the Conservative Party, but another party who doesn't understand how important the economy is. They go together, and we're going to continue going forward.
Honourable Member for Skeena of Oakley Valley.
The only thing Liberals understand is how access and cash go hand in hand. From the very start, all right-thinking people understood that the review of this pipeline was a cruel joke. Everyone except the Liberals, of course, who broke their promise to redo the process. Kinder Morgan shareholders passed a motion about First Nations rights and concerns about the environment, and that these concerns are, quote, raising questions about the progress and prospects of the long-term viability, taking money from Kinder Morgan lobbyists, breaking their promises on the environment. How bad has it gotten for Liberals that Kinder Morgan shareholders are more concerned about First Nations rights, the environment, than the Liberal government who swore to uphold them?
The
Honourable Minister of the Environment.
This project went through a full review. It was actually, we added additional consultations with Indigenous peoples. More than 40 Indigenous communities have signed impact benefit agreements with the proponent, and there are 157 conditions attached. We understand that this project is an important project, that it needs to go ahead. And it's interesting that we have the NDP party in Alberta who is working very hard on this project. It was supported by the previous government in British Columbia. We need to provide certainty to the market, and this project will go ahead.
The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to invite the Minister of Environment to apologize for repeatedly asking the official opposition leader to stand and answer questions. Today, he is attending the funeral of one of our longtime colleagues and a friend to so many on all sides of this House, Gord Brown. I hope she'll apologize.
The Honourable Minister of the Environment. Minister of the Environment.
Our thoughts are with the family of Gord Brown. He was an amazing member of the House of Commons. However, we are entitled to raise important issues, and I think that that's what everyone expects. That's what Canadians expect. So I will ask once again, will the party opposite stand up and confirm that they stand for a woman's right to choose?
The Honourable Member for Banff Airdrie.
Well, that's pathetic to not apologize, Mr. Speaker. Now, the Prime Minister has infamously stated that he admires China's dictatorship, and that's quite evident in how he operates. Every time he faces opposition, whether it's in this House or from Canadians, he takes away the tools that opposition parties have to hold him to account. And now he's proposing to limit how and when political parties can spend money that Canadians have freely contributed to support them. So will he impose those same restrictions on ministerial travel and on government advertising in this newly established pre-election period?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, leading up to the last election, Canadians were justifiably fed up with the Conservative government's misuse of tax dollars for partisan advertising. That is why we moved quickly in 2016 with our new advertising policy to ban partisan government ads and establish third-party oversights. We also banned government advertising in the 90 days that precede a fixed election and for any government program that has yet to be approved by Parliament. By focusing government advertising on Canadians' needs instead of partisan objectives, we've been able to cut the government's advertising budget by almost half, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to serve the taxpayers of Canada and be transparent.
The Honourable Member for Banff Airdrie.
Well, I guess we'll take that as a no, so I guess we'll try another topic, because clearly he doesn't want to try and deal with the actual problem here. So getting young people over 18 out to vote, Mr. Speaker, is a thing that everyone in this House agrees is a good thing. But what isn't right is invading the privacy of children. The Prime Minister's new law will establish a future register of electors for children between the ages of 14 and 17. And yesterday, the Prime Minister disagreed with us when we raised this concern about political parties targeting children. So again, I ask, will the Prime Minister commit that information about children will not be distributed to political parties or political candidates?
The Honourable Minister for Democratic Institutions.
To the member's opening comments, we dealt with the problem in the last election. We defeated the Harper Conservatives. But beyond that, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives need to understand that, in fact, what we're doing with the future voter registry is engaging more young Canadians in the political process such that they can develop their citizenship and be ready to participate in Canada's electoral system fully. And I can confirm for the member across there that as a current practice, only the list of eligible voters will be shared with parties and candidates.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to electoral reform, the Liberal government and the Prime Minister have no credibility because they reneged on their promises. They did so, and now they want to create a register of electors for children and teenagers aged 14, 15, 16, and 17. So this is a very serious issue, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister guarantee Canadians that this registry will not be made accessible to political parties so that they can have information this information on teenagers in Canada?
Institution démocratique.
The Honourable Minister. As I said, Mr. Speaker, the practice today will continue.
Only the list of actual electors will be shared with political parties. That will not be affected by the establishment of a youth voting a youth future voting registry, the objective of which is to encourage more young Canadians to participate in the process.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent. Mr. Speaker, at least we can say is that the government isn't clear, because it's not clear on elections reform. What it does is set aside its promises. But there's another point that is of concern to us, that political parties won't be able to do what they do before the election with the money that Canadians gave them. Can the minister guarantee that the ministers will follow the same rules and will not go on spending sprees in the pre-election period?
Les institutions démocratiques.
The Honourable Minister.
Again, as I said earlier, leading up to the last election, the Conservatives used quasi-partisan advertising tax dollars to pay for government advertising that was highly partisan. That is one of the reasons why we've changed our advertising policy to ban this kind of partisan government advertising, and beyond that, to extend 90 days before the actual election, the writ period, to have the same rules that apply during the writ period, which are very robust rules, to political parties and the government leading up to the writ period. So we're doing exactly that which you said.
The Honourable Member for Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
Well, Mr. Speaker, earlier today, Al Gore stated, and I quote, "The Kinder Morgan pipeline carrying dirty tar sands oil would be a step backward," end quote. Does the government agree with Al Gore, who calls our natural resources dirty and wants to kill the Trans Mountain expansion?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government has initiated formal financial discussions with Kinder Morgan, the result of which will be to remove uncertainty overhanging the project. We are confident in our jurisdiction in this matter. We are also actively pursuing legislative options that will assert and reinforce the federal jurisdiction in this matter, which we know we clearly have. Hundreds of thousands of hardworking Canadians depend on this project being built. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Desnathy, Mississippi Churchill River.
In April, the government has told us that the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls inquiry must put families at the center of its work. However, they continue to ignore the calls from at least 500 families, many from remote and northern communities, who haven't had the chance to speak to the inquiry. In order to heal, the families must be heard. When will this government extend the mandate of the inquiry so that all families can be heard?
The Honourable Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations.
Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to ending this ongoing national tragedy, and we thank the Commission for its work so far. I'm discussing the Commission's frequent request for an extension with families, Indigenous partners, and our provincial and territorial counterparts. The Independent Commission's mandate is clear. Families must be at the centre of their work. The families of these women and girls need answers. They need to be heard to the systemic and institutional failures that lead to the murder of far too many Indigenous women and girls.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi, Bay James, Nunavik, and you.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, the Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs pulled out of the inquiry on murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. They've deemed the report incomplete and stated that the process would not allow for a rigorous examination of the systems that contribute to violence against Indigenous women and girls. This is extremely serious, Mr. Speaker. The minister responsible has not done enough. How can these women, these families, these Indigenous communities heal and continue to move forward? The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, our government is determined to put an end to this national tragedy. The mandate for the Independent Commission is clear. Families must be at the heart of this work. We'll be offering families the answers they have long waited for, dealing with the systemic and institutionalized treatment behind this tragedy. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haut-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, we learned this morning that the Criminal Intelligence Service advised police forces to be on the lookout for violent street gangs, MS-13, and their entry into Canada. The report says that members of MS-13 will probably use the migration of Salvadorians to Canada to set up new cells, probably in the greater Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal regions. Can the minister reassure Canadians and tell them that a plan is already in place to prevent members of the MS-13 gang from entering the country? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the police and security agencies of the country are surveilling all the time for risks and threats that may pose a danger to the safety of Canadians, both domestically and internationally. We have active arrangements with partners around the world for the appropriate sharing of intelligence, and Canadians can indeed be assured that their police and security agencies are taking all possible steps to make sure that we keep Canadians safe.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haut-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "I continue to trust and support our national security agencies and officials. When they identify concerns surrounding a particular problem, I have confidence in them and I believe them." So the Prime Minister believes his security agencies and has confidence in them. Does the Prime Minister have the intention once and for all to put an end to the problems and the crisis at the border and restore order in Saint-Bernard-de-la-Colle? The Honourable Minister.
very obviously between CBSA and the RCMP and the Department of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, a long series of steps are already being taken to deal effectively with that situation. Our goals are twofold. Number one, to make sure that all Canadian laws are thoroughly enforced, and number two, to make sure that all of Canada's international obligations are properly respected. We have achieved those goals thus far, and we intend to continue to do so.
Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Criminal Intelligence Service of Canada calls the MS-13 gang one of the largest and most organized violent crime groups in the world, and notes that the group exploits migration patterns to set up new cells. And I would consider 50,000 people illegally crossing the border this year from the United States a migration pattern. So my question is very simple. When will the Prime Minister close the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary, the Minister of Citizenship.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et encore
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And once again, Canada is an open country that helps people in need of protection, but our government once again is determined to ensure that immigration is in order and protects our immigration system and Canadians. In recent weeks, we have seen ideas put forth by parties calling or showing that they don't understand the situation or the agreement. The agreement on the Safe Third Country is very important, and it's used by Canada and the United States to cooperate in the processing of asylum claims. Once again, we are respecting these conventions with our partners.
Calgary Nose Hill.
The Prime Minister recently met with the President of Uganda, who a National Post article said today has been vocally supportive of legislation that would have made homosexuality punishable by life in prison. The article also said that our Prime Minister did not raise this issue in his meeting, even though previous Canadian governments have been publicly critical of this law. The Citizenship and Immigration Committee is about to travel to Uganda. Given this, can the Prime Minister specifically clarify his position on Uganda's anti-homosexuality law?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Speaker, our government is a tireless advocate for LGBTQ2 rights both at home and abroad. In fact, our Defence Minister alongside Louise Arbour had the chance to raise our concerns about LGBTI issues with the President of Uganda recently. I've had the chance to raise LGBTQ2 and LGBTI issues with other leaders on the African continent recently as well. We are also the co-chair of the Equal Rights Coalition. We'll host a global conference that will help advocate for better protection and promotion of LGBTI rights for that community, and we continue to do that feverishly here at home and everywhere we travel in the world.
Honourable Member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Over 10,000 Canadians have died from opioid overdoses since this crisis began, a death toll that continues to mount. U.S. federal and state governments have taken strong action against opioid manufacturers, securing criminal convictions for improper marketing and recovering over $700 million in compensation for damages. Yet this government has failed to even investigate or pursue compensation for the massive public cost of these dangerous products and the harm caused to Canadian families. Why have the Liberals failed to launch an investigation or pursue compensation like the U.S. has done?
Wow. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our government recognizes that the current opioid situation is a terrible situation, and our government recognizes that the high level of opioids historically prescribed in Canada has contributed to the devastating impact of the current opioid crisis in this country. We are exploring all options to address the crisis. Unfortunately, at the same time that the United States was pursuing charges against pharmaceutical companies who inappropriately marketed opioids, the former Harper government failed to take similar actions. However, I can assure you that our government is looking at ways to strengthen industry transparency, accountability, and we will have more to report in the coming time.
Deputy de Saint-Hyacinthe.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Mr. Speaker, throughout the entire country, the number of opioid-related overdoses is going up at an alarming rate. This is more than a crisis. This is an emergency situation. In 2017, 4,000 people died of opioid overdoses. This is not just isolated cases of accidental poisoning. We need to look at the impact on the loved ones of these victims, on our healthcare system, which is already overburdened. When will the Liberal government finally recognize that this is an urgent public health problem and grant the resources necessary to solve the situation? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for her question. We are dealing with a public health crisis in Canada, and our government is deeply concerned by its tragic effects. That is why we are very pleased that in Budget 2017, we invested over $230 million to help provinces and territories and make sure that services are put into place and to help provinces cope with the costs. The Honourable Member for Pierrefonds-Dollard. Mr. Speaker, we know that science, technology, engineering, and math play an important role in the future of the Canadian economy. We also know that children are born curious. It's very important to encourage them to follow this path. We must make sure that our children have the opportunity to see the exciting aspects of science. Can the Minister of Science inform this House of efforts being made by our government to promote science among the country's young Canadians? The Honourable Minister of Science. Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank the member for Pierrefonds-Dollard for promoting science throughout Canada. Next week, there's going to be Science Odyssey held.
Celebration of science. From May 11th to 20th, museums, university and college labs and federal research facilities all across Canada will open their doors to Canadians. I encourage all members to promote these events in their communities and join Canadians in exploring the exciting research being done in Canada.
Wonderful. Député de Lévis-Lotbinière.
The member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, here's the next chapter of my fishtail. We found out that the cousin of the wife of the Minister of Fisheries led the business that won the calls for tender for the fishing license for lucrative shellfish. The contract was awarded to a business operated by the brother of a Liberal MP, which also benefits a former Liberal MP. Without exaggerating, is it not time to relaunch the bidding process for the fishing license, given all these conflicts of interest? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans. Mr. Speaker, our government has decided that it was important to bring in a new player for the Arctic surf clam fishery. Unlike the Conservatives, we did not forget to include Indigenous communities. We are proud of the decision that we have made, which will benefit the greatest possible number of Canadians in the Atlantic region.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Fisheries has made a sham of the surf clam quota allocation process. He unilaterally expropriated 25% of the quota from one holder. The re-awarded quota went to the company owned by a federal Liberal MP's brother, and also benefits a former Liberal MP. Yesterday, we learned that the cousin of the minister's wife will be heading the company that won the bid. With all of these conflicts of interest, isn't it time to restart the allocation process?
Parliament Secretary, Minister of Fisheries and Oceans.
Mr. Speaker, our decision to introduce Indigenous participation is consistent with our government's commitment to developing a renewed relationship between Canada and Indigenous peoples. The Minister made his decision to allow for increased Indigenous participation in the fishery, and we reject any insinuation to the contrary in the strongest of terms, Mr. Speaker. Our government is proud of this decision and will continue to focus on how it will directly benefit First Nations communities across Atlantic Canada and Quebec.
Honourable Member for Kamloops, Thompson Caribou.
The Liberals brought in a new player, all right. They brought in the minister's family to be the new player. First, the Fisheries Minister awards a multi-million-dollar contract to a group that did not have a boat, they did not have multiple First Nations partners, they were not incorporated. Second, the majority of the contract isn't owned by First Nations, but the brother of a Liberal MP. Wow. Third, the cousin to the minister's wife is heading up the company that won the bid. Mr. Speaker, this is blatant nepotism and abuse of his position. Will the minister commit to restarting this process?
Mr. Speaker, the fact that there is a new entrant entering the surf clam fishery should be no surprise to these Conservatives. They went through 3 years ago a similar process. The only difference was they forgot to include Indigenous people, Mr. Speaker. Our government did not forget to include Indigenous people. In fact, we picked the best deal that will benefit the highest number of Atlantic Canadians, 4 Indigenous nations from Atlantic Canada, and 1 Indigenous nation from Quebec, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Nations were always welcome to be part of the process, but the minister of the past government made sure he kept his hands right out of it. So this is just wrong. The Prime Minister tasked his cabinet with living up to, quote, the highest ethical standards. Clearly, the minister has not lived up to these expectations. He's failed Indigenous communities, he's failing Canadians, and he's failed the people of the Grand Banks. It's time for the minister to acknowledge that it was an inside job, it's a sham, and we would like to hear him stand up today and commit to restarting this process.
The Honourable Parliament Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, our decision to increase Indigenous participation in fishing is consistent with our government's commitment to developing a renewed relationship with Canada and Indigenous peoples. Enhancing access to the Arctic surf clam fishery broadens the distribution of benefits from this public resource and is a powerful step towards reconciliation. When the previous government went through a very similar public process to access this fishery, they forgot to include Indigenous people. Mr. Speaker, we did not.
Member for Saskatoon West. Order.
Mr. Speaker, next week marks the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia and Transphobia. Once again, the government issued statements of concern, but we see little or no action to back up these concerns. The Liberals promised in the last election to remove the 5-year ban on men who have sex with men from donating blood, but instead reduced it to 1 year. With no evidence to support the ban and a severe shortage of blood and organs in our health system, will the government now end the gay blood ban and eliminate this form of homophobia?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Canada's blood system is recognized internationally as one of the safest in the world and is committed to protecting the safety and security of that supply. Health Canada is responsible for assessing the safety and quality of the blood and plasma products and at the same time the standards that apply, regardless of who collects plasma or whether the donors are paid. The decision as to whether Canadian plasma donors can be paid rests with the province and the territories. Our government will continue to work with Canadian Blood Services, Emma Quebec and other groups to ensure that we can address this blood ban issue. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Sherbrooke. Mr. Speaker, we found out in the Journal de Montréal that Susan MacArthur, a former UBS employee, was part of the board of directors of the Canada Revenue Agency while the bank's financial scandal was occurring. Her appointment was political cronyism. Pure and simple. She admits it. Neither UBS nor her clients were charged in Canada, whereas in the United States and France, they cracked down hard. Considering the facts, will the minister commit to a thorough review of this file to make sure that there was no undue influence? The Honourable Minister for National Revenue. I will tell my colleague that all of these events happened under the Harper government. Currently, there is no problem with the board of directors at the Canada Revenue Agency. The rules are upheld, everything is in order.
Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
When the Liberals looked at approving the sale of the largest seniors care home company in British Columbia, we warned them about the murky ownership of Ongbong, but they ignored these concerns and rubber-stamped the deal anyway.
Shameful.
Since then, the communist Chinese government has taken control of the company, and its CEO has been sentenced to 18 years in jail. Now, having failed to every single step of this process, Mr. Speaker, will the Liberals show one iota of humility, apologize to BC seniors, and Mr. Speaker, and apologize to seniors and get that company back under Canadian control today?
That's right.
Honourable Parliament Secretary and Minister of Industry.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question. Our government is open to investment that will grow our economy and create middle-class jobs. Mr. Speaker, the Investment Canada Act provides for a process to screen these kinds of investments to ensure that they are of an overall net economic benefit to Canada. That was done in this case. And, Mr. Speaker, after that review, Cedar Tree made specific commitments to retirement concepts of the people of British Columbia. Those commitments are being met and maintained, and we are monitoring the situation to ensure that that will happen. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Langley Aldergrove.
Mr. Speaker, the Innovation Minister promised Canadians that he had done his research before selling the BC-based senior care facilities to China Ongbong Insurance. Now we've learned that the company has been seized by the Communist Chinese government and that the founder has been sent to prison for 18 years. The Liberals never should have approved this sale, which allows these Canadian properties to be controlled by Beijing. Why did the minister refuse to listen to our warnings? And what is he going to do to get these properties back into Canadian hands?
Honourable Parliament Secretary, the Minister of Industry and Science.
Mr. Speaker, Cedar Tree committed in the investment review process to maintaining levels of full and part-time employment, to have a Canadian operator retirement concepts continue to manage the business, not to close or repurpose any of its existing residences, and to maintain a significant level of equity here in Canada. These commitments are being met, Mr. Speaker, and they are legally binding. The retirement residences remain subject to full provincial regulation, which the Canadian operator must continue to meet or exceed. All of these conditions are continuing to be met, Mr. Speaker, and we continue to monitor the situation.
Member for Abbotsford.
Well, last year we warned the Liberals against allowing Anbang to buy BC's biggest seniors care provider. We know how that played out. The chairman is now in jail for 18 years. But it gets worse. Now, Communist China has proposed a takeover of Aecon, an iconic Canadian company. This has raised serious concerns from security experts and the construction industry. This is a terrible deal for Canada and a threat to our sovereignty and security. How can Canadians trust this Prime Minister to make the right decision on Aecon when he failed so miserably with Anbang?
Honourable Parliament Secretary, the Minister of Innovation and Science.
Mr. Speaker, as I've just stated, our government welcomes international investment that will benefit the Canadian economy, but not, Mr. Speaker, at the expense of national security. The Investment Canada Act includes a multi-step national security review process, which we follow. That rigorous consultation process has been undertaken by our government's national security agencies, and we can confirm that a cabinet order has been issued in that case. We'll continue, Mr. Speaker, to do our due diligence to make sure that these investments will benefit Canada, and we will never compromise, Mr. Speaker, our national security.
The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, we know immense gaps remain in health outcomes between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians. This is particularly true in urban areas like Winnipeg. We also know that one of the most stark needs in Indigenous communities is the area of mental health, especially when it comes to our youth. With significant recent investments in healthcare, can the Honourable Minister of Indigenous Services please update Canadians and the House of Commons on the work underway to make mental health supports more accessible for those who need it most?
The Honourable Minister of Indigenous Services.
I want to thank the member from Winnipeg Centre for this important question. As he points out, the challenges that Indigenous peoples face in terms of mental wellness are complex and deep-rooted. We have made significant investments in this area, and many people already know about the Hope for Wellness line, which is now available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in 5 languages. The good news this week is that the Hope for Wellness line is now also available for online chat at hopeforwellness.ca. We hope many Indigenous people, particularly youth, will take advantage of this new opportunity to seek support.
For Flamborough-Glanbrook.
Mr. Speaker, last night, without provocation, the Iranian regime launched a vicious missile attack on Israeli forces in the Golan Heights, a gross act of aggression against a steadfast Canadian ally and the only stable democracy in the Middle East. While the Liberals continue to restore relations and lift economic sanctions, the Khomeini regime in Iran continues to spread its human rights violations and thrust its tentacles of terror across the Middle East. Will these Liberals stand up for one of our closest allies, Israel, and condemn the unprovoked attacks by the terror-sponsoring regime in Iran?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary, the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, as a steadfast friend and ally of Israel's, we certainly condemn Iran's attack on Israeli military forces, and we fully support Israel's right to defend itself against Iranian aggression. We call on Iran to stop any further provocations.
Well, member for Churchill, Kiwantanuk Askey.
Mr. Speaker, whether it's comments in this House or messages we hear outside, it is clear that the fight for women's equality is far from over. But it's not enough to hear the Liberals say they believe in choice. The reality is that many Canadian women, because of where they live, don't have access to abortion services. It's 2018. We've got to stop playing politics on the backs of women in this country. So when will the Liberal government step up, enact the Canada Health Act, and ensure that women, no matter where they live, can have access to their reproductive rights.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, our government believes that every woman has the right to choose, regardless of where she lives. And we believe that a woman should have access to reproductive health options no matter where she lives in Canada, in rural or urban settings. I recognize that access to these services varies across the country. Our government has made Mifugaimizo less restrictive and more available to Canadians and to provinces and territories, and we are truly hoping that provinces and territories will be reimbursing it. We continue to examine ways to improve access to reproductive health services to women in Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, tourism is a huge economic driver in my province of Nova Scotia, and especially of my riding of South Shore St. Margaret's. Next week, the Rendezvous Canada Conference will be held in Halifax, Nova Scotia. We will be welcoming members of the tourism industry from not only our country, but from around the world. Can the Minister of Small Business and Tourism update the House on how our government is helping to market Canada tourism to the world?
Honourable Minister of Small Business and Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, the member for South Shore St. Margaret's is absolutely correct. Destination Canada is hosting Rendezvous Canada, which will highlight Nova Scotia and Canada's tourism industry. Budget 2017 made available $37.5 million for 5 years, stabilizing Destination Canada's budget at $95.5 million. Destination Canada markets our unique tourism experiences to the world, and we are seeing results. Last year, Canada welcomed 20.8 million visitors, and the tourism industry, which supports 1.8 million Canadian jobs, generated a record of $97.4 billion in revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Sherwood Park, Port Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, every time we ask a question about Taiwan, the government completely ignores the question and tells us how much they love China. But the Taiwan-Canada relationship is an important one, economically, politically, and strategically. So I want to re-ask a question that was asked yesterday. Hopefully the Parliamentary Secretary will answer it this time. Taiwan is being blocked from participating in the World Health Assembly, which is meant to bring the world together for global health. So will the government take a public position to support Taiwan's participation in this vital World Health Assembly?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, we certainly continue to support Taiwan's meaningful participation in international multilateral fora where its presence provides important contributions to the global public good. Taiwan's role as an observer in the annual World Health Assembly meetings is in the interest of the international health community, and it's important to the fight against pandemic and disease. Canada is disappointed that Taiwan did not receive an invitation this year. We welcome participation from the entire international community to promote global health.
The Honourable Member for Rivière du Nord. Mr. Speaker, yesterday, the National Assembly of Quebec unanimously passed a motion demanding that the federal government recognize and respect Quebec's autonomy with regards to regulating cannabis within its own borders. A very simple question, Mr. Speaker. Will this government respect, yes or no, Quebec's autonomy with regards to regulating cannabis within its own borders? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The current approach to cannabis does not work. It's allowed criminals to make profits and has not kept our children from harm. We respect the work that the Senate is doing on this matter, and we are ready to receive the report. This government is confident that C-45 will be passed this year. The government will continue to work with its partners to make sure that we have a responsible transition towards a legal cannabis market. The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères. That's not an answer, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we found out today that the Canada Revenue Agency decided to refuse the IRAI registered charity status because it has a political purpose. The CRA has already granted this status to the Federal Idea, which educates us about the noble virtues of federalism. And what a surprise, the vast majority of its board of directors are donors to the Liberal Party. Can the Minister of Revenue assure us that the refusal to grant status to the IRAI is not a political order? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. I would like to thank my colleague to allow me to say just how the 41 MPs from Quebec do exceptional work when it comes to the issues that affect Quebec. 41 Liberal MPs who are able to act and can talk about action and concrete investments in infrastructure in housing, in research and development for the most far-flung regions. Small craft harbor, broadband. Quebec can be proud of its 41 MPs from Quebec.
The Honourable Member from Manicouagan.
Mr. Speaker, speaking of Liberal partisanship, in the last budget, the government announced that written media would be able to obtain registered charity status. Surprise! Yesterday, La Presse announced its conversion to a non-profit organization. What you need to know, Mr. Speaker, is that just like the federal idea, the vast majority of members of the Board of Directors of La Presse are donors to the Liberal Party of Canada. In spite of the fact that La Presse has an editorial mandate which, surprise, has a political purpose. Can the minister tell us if the paper will still get registered charitable status? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Mr. Speaker, we recognize, of course, that more and more Canadians get their news online. That means our media have to innovate. In Budget 2018, we announced that the government was going to study new models to allow media to receive donations. The budget also announced $50 million to support journalism in communities that are not being well served and $14 million for local newspapers and radio in official language minority communities. Also, $775 million is given to Radio Canada CBC to make sure that we have good media coverage throughout the entire country, which, of course, respects journalistic independence.
I'd like to draw to the attention of honourable members the presence in the gallery of the Honourable Olivia Grange, Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport in Jamaica. And it's time for the usual Thursday question, and we'll ask the Honourable Member for Perth Wellington.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it being Thursday, it is my privilege to ask the Thursday question. And I might say, as someone who has done a statistical analysis of the past 30 years worth of Thursday question, it's an honor to actually ask the question today. And could the government House leader inform the House what business the government plans to bring before the House for the remainder of this week and the week returning after our next constituency week? And having the Leader of the Opposition having designated the Departments of Finance, and Citizenship and Immigration as to be consideration in the Committee of the Whole, could she inform the House when those two dates for those Committee of the Wholes will be scheduled? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, this afternoon we will be beginning debate on Bill C-76, the Elections Act. This debate will continue tomorrow. And after that, we will be benefiting from a week in our constituencies. However, if we receive a message from the Senate this afternoon about Bill C-49, the Transportation Modernization Act, the latter will take precedence.
Our return following the constituency week, we will resume debate on Bill C-76 on Tuesday. Wednesday, we will start debate at report stage and third reading Bill C-57, the Sustainable Development Act. On Thursday, we will begin debate on Bill C-75, the Justice Modernization Act. Finally, Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 81-4, I would like to designate Tuesday, May 22nd for consideration in a Committee of the Whole of the main estimates for the Department of Finance and Thursday, May 24th for the Department of Citizenship and Immigration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank the Honourable Member for Perth Wellington and the Honourable Government House Leader for the update. Tabling of documents. Dépôt de documents. J'ai l'honneur de déposer.
I have the honor of tabling, pursuant to Section 76(1) of the Official Languages Act, a report entitled A Principled Approach to the Modernization of the Official Languages, Communications with and Services to the Public, Regulations.
108.3F, this report is deemed permanently referred to the Standing Committee on Official Languages. Tabling of documents. Introduction of government bills. Mr. Bryson for Mr. Sajan, seconded by Ms. Qualtrough, moves that for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the National Defense Act and to make related and consequential amendments to other acts. This motion is deemed adopted. Mr. Bryson for Mr. Sajan, seconded by Ms. Qualtrough, moves that the bill be now read a first time and be printed. This motion is deemed adopted.
First reading of this bill, première lecture de ce projet de loi.
When will the bill be read a second time? At the next sitting of the House. Statements by ministers. Déclaration du ministre. Report de délégation interparlementaire. Reports from interparliamentary delegations. Presenting reports from committees. The Honourable Member for Battle River, Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I have the pleasure to present in both official languages the 46th report of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, entitled Report 6, Royal Military College of Canada, National Defence of the 2017 Fall Report of the Auditor General of Canada. Pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests that the government table a comprehensive response to this report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting reports from committees. L'honorable député de Mont-Royal.
The Honourable Member from Mont-Royal.
Speaker, I have two reports to table. J'ai l'honneur de présenter.
You have the honour of tabling in both official languages the 18th report of the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights concerning Bill C-375, an act to amend the Criminal Code, pre-sentence report. The committee studied the bill and decided to report to the House with an amendment.
Honour, Mr. Speaker, to present in both official languages the 19th report of the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights in relation to Bill S-210, an act to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, the Civil Marriage Act, and the Criminal Code, and to make consequential amendments to other acts. The committee has studied the bill and has decided to report the bill back to the House without amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting reports from committees. First reading of Senate public bills. Première lecture de projet de loi d'intérêt public éminent du Sénat. Motions. Motion. Ms. Kwan, seconded by Ms. Blaney, North Island Powell River, moves that the 15th report of the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration presented on Wednesday, December 13th, 2017, be concurred in. Debate. The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's my privilege to stand in the House today to once again raise the issue around Section 38(1)(c) of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, better known as medical inadmissibility due to excessive demand. As many in this place are now aware, this provision of IRPA is a cost-only analysis that estimates the potential cost in use of social and health services that a person applying for permanent residence in Canada could incur. Currently, under Section 38(2) of IRPA, convention refugees, protected persons, spouses, and dependents as part of a family sponsorship application are exempt from this restriction. This means that only those applying to those who are economic applicants and their families, caregivers, provincial nominees, parents and grandparents, students, foreign workers, and temporary residents would have to be subject to Section 38(1)(c). The provision works in such a way that should one member of a family member be found at risk of placing an excessive demand on health or social services, the entire family's application is rejected. And as I said, this is a cost-only analysis. Not only does it ignore the benefits that an individual brings to Canada, but it also ignores and invalidates the sum of benefits that the whole family brings to Canada. This issue made national headlines regarding the case of Professor Philip Montoya in 2016. Professor Montoya came to Canada with his wife, daughter, and son in 2012. He and his wife worked, paid their taxes, and contributed to their community.
Their daughter and son attended school in Canada. However, when the Montoya family decided that they wanted to stay here, make Canada their permanent home, and apply for permanent residence, they were rejected. Why? Because their son, Nico, has Down syndrome. Following this, last summer, Global News investigative journalism brought even more attention to this little-known provision, raising serious questions about how the policy was implemented. There were questions over the so-called basket of services that counted in the calculation and those that didn't. Why it was that the threshold was set where it was, whether or not the policy was discriminatory, and the impact it was having on families. So in October 2017, the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration undertook a study on this provision. We heard from 25 witnesses and received 23 briefs. Committee members heard loud and clear that this provision was legislated discrimination against individuals with disabilities. Of the witnesses that offered their opinion on which should be done with this policy, it was nearly unanimous that the only option was to repeal Section 38(1)(c) of IRPA. Anything less would simply be to continue the discrimination. In fact, not only were the witnesses appearing at committee convinced this policy was discriminatory, so too were Liberal MPs. The member for St. John's East stated to the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship during the minister's appearance, and I quote, "I must say that at this point in time, I do not see how raising the threshold and excluding fewer people changes the fact that excluding anyone is prima facie discriminatory and violates Canadian values." The member for Surrey Centre spoke the change of opinion he had about the policy during the course of the study and evoked a strong and harsh image where he compared the idea of this policy to the mindset of the slave trade. And he said, and I quote, "I would say that initially I thought it was a good policy, because that would perhaps be a big burden on Canadians. But then I look back, and I don't want to equate it to this, and it's no different from the slave trade, in which only those selected as the strongest and most able-bodied were brought from Africa. It's not that whole policy isn't good at all, but I'm saying it's akin to discriminating when we're picking only people who are healthy, fully functioning, with no intellectual disabilities and physical disabilities." The member had also summed up the general view of committee members when he said, and I quote, "As you can tell, almost all of us have an inclination that this policy is discriminatory. We already can see that even within immigration, there's a two-tier policy." The minister stated on numerous occasions, and he said, I quote, "The policy is out of step with Canadian values on accommodating people with disabilities." And he promised changes. I was hopeful that given that the near unanimous opinion of witnesses, the strong views of Liberal members on the committee, and the minister's understanding that this policy was wrong, that the committee would be able to table a unanimously supported report that called on the government to do one thing and one thing alone, and that is to repeal Section 38(1)(c) of IRPA. Unfortunately, I was to be disappointed. Instead of issuing that report, committee tabled a report which, while including repeal as a recommendation, provided the government with a host of interim measures that it could take instead. And it was as though committee members were no longer worried that this policy was prima facie discriminatory, as the member of St. John's East described it. So, as the NDP representative at the committee, I attached a dissenting opinion to the report. I will never forget the story of Mercedes Benitez, a caregiver who, after nearly a decade of working in Canada, waiting to be reunited with her family, she was informed her application would be rejected because her son has an intellectual disability. Thankfully, after intense advocacy and support from the public and media reports, like the Montoya family, she was able to receive an intervention on the file from the minister, which ultimately was approved. She told committee members that, and I quote, "Even though my case is already resolved, I think the excessive demands should be repealed.
I still feel the pain when they say I am good enough to work, but not good enough to say because of my son. In this spirit, the NDP moved 2 recommendations in our dissenting report. 1, repeal Section 38(1)(c) of IRPA, and 2, for the government to work with the provinces and territorial governments to determine any increased costs to health and social services as a result of this repeal, and to increase CST and CHT funding accordingly. The minister has stated that the government would be announcing its policy change on April 12th of 2018. This was because that was the deadline for the government to respond to the committee's report. While the minister did not feel the urgency to act in between time, I, like many of the families impacted, were very anxious to learn what the minister would do to address this discriminatory policy. The minister missed his self-imposed deadline, and when he finally got around to announcing the new policy, I truly was disappointed with the announcement. The announcement policy was not to repeal Section 38(1)(c). Despite warnings from the member from St. John's East, the government announced that it would be increasing the threshold instead from $6,555 per year to $20,000 per year, and amended the definition of social services by removing references to special education, social and vocational rehabilitation services, and personal support services. The government expects that this will reduce discrimination by 75%. So that is to say, not 100% discrimination, but rather 25% of discrimination is okay. While the government states it agrees with the recommendation to eliminate the policy, it provides no timeline for when that 25% will no longer be discriminated against. At the press conference, the minister stated that this new policy will be forward-going only. This is devastating news for families whose applications were just rejected recently. The suggestion that they can then apply for permanent residency under humanitarian and compassionate grounds can add up to another 3 years to the long separation that they had already had to endure. If the HNC application is accepted, only then can they submit a sponsorship application for the family to be reunited. For some families, this additional process may well mean that their children would not qualify to be part of the application as they would have aged out. In addition, the minister also failed to state whether or not the new policy would apply to individuals and families with current applications in the system. As a result, many of the individuals impacted by this policy express hope but worry to me about the pathway forward. Such is the situation with Monica Mateo Allard. Monica also arrived in Canada as a live-in caregiver in 2008. She had worked hard every day for 10 years taking care of the children of a Canadian family. She has spent most of her 13-year marriage separated from Richard, her husband, and their 9-year-old daughter, Brianna. On most nights, Monica cries herself to sleep from the pain of the separation. In 2012, she applied for permanent resident status. Monica's permanent resident application was flagged for excessive demand because of her daughter, Brianna, who is cared for by Richard in the Philippines, was born with a visual impairment, a condition that was arbitrarily determined to require, quote, excessive demand on the Canadian healthcare system. Brianna would benefit from speech therapy and could possibly require surgery, but is otherwise a healthy and happy child. In December 2017, Monica was expecting her second child. Every effort was made so that Monica could be reunited with her family in Canada so that she is not alone in Canada while she gave birth to her second baby. The call for her file to be expedited failed, and she was advised by IRCC that her only option would be to apply for an urgent temporary visitor's visa for her husband and daughter if she did not want to be alone during childbirth. After discussing this with her family, it was decided that the cost of applying for these additional visas and the travel expenses was just too much for the family. This is because over the course of the last 6 years, since her first applying for permanent resident status, she and her family have had to redo medical exams 4 times, in addition to security screenings and continued renewal of work permits for herself. On January 1st, 2018, Monica gave birth to her baby boy alone in Canada. Unwaveringly optimistic and driven to reunite with her family in Canada, Monica believes that she was blessed to have her son and sees him as a reward for her isolation. She continues to dream to be permanently reunited with her daughter, Brianna, and her husband, Richard. According to information provided to Monica, it appears that so long as she is processed under the new rules, her application will finally be completed and be successful. That would mean that her daughter will get to meet her little brother for the first time, that her husband will get to meet his son for the first time. Her case is one example of why I was so anxious to learn about whether or not the new rules would apply to the pending cases. After multiple inquiries, I was finally given assurances from the Minister's office this last Sunday night, that application currently in the system would be assessed under the new rules. Now, for that, Mr. Speaker, I thank the government and I thank the Minister. Monica is hopeful that her case would be processed before this winter so her family could be reunited here in Canada for Christmas. Aside from the cases that are currently being processed in the system, I want to draw to the attention to the members the attention of the caregivers who have been providing valuable support and services to families in Canada for years, have been subjected to unjustly long processing delays on their permanent residence application, and after waiting 10 years in some cases to bring their families here, were recently rejected because of this discriminatory policy. In fact, on Monday, May 7th, I held a press conference in Toronto to shine a light on this heartbreaking story. Shirley Benigno is a single mother of 3. Her son, John Nico, has Down syndrome. Shirley has worked hard her entire life to provide for her family. She first moved to Hong Kong, where she tolerated abuse and harassment in her work environment so that she could send money back home. She had hoped her transition to Canada would mean a new beginning for her family. Upon arrival in Canada in 2009, as part of the Living Caregivers program, Shirley started working 2 jobs and saving all the money she could for her children's move to Canada. She applied for permanent residence in Canada and to be reunited with her family in 2011. Outside of work, she prepared food for various events, supplied homemade goods for 2 convenience stores, and took the National Food Safety Training with the expectation and hope that one day of going back to school and then eventually opening up her own family restaurant. All this came to an abrupt end after waiting 7 years when her application for permanent residence was denied in 2017 because of her son's disability. This is despite his medical assessment stating that John Nico is capable of taking care of himself and is even able to work in an unskilled or semi-skilled position. As a result, Shirley's work permits were revoked, depriving her of all income. She no longer could provide herself, let alone her family. This meant that she was unable to send money back home to her family, and her children had to leave school because they could not afford tuition. This is absolutely devastating to Shirley and her family. Shirley stated in disbelief, quote, "I always thought Canada did not discriminate against people because they are different. I thought Canada had protection for people who are different." Since the rejection of her application, Shirley was finally able to obtain legal counsel who is trying to help her with a request to reconsider her denial. If this is not granted, she will be forced to apply for permanent residence under the humanitarian compassionate grounds, a purely discretionary stream of immigration that could take up to 3 years to process. Aside from this additional delay, if Shirley has to make a new application, it would mean that one of her children would age out and will not be able to be reunited with Shirley, shattering her dream to have her family here in Canada. If Shirley's application was processed under the new rules, John Nico would not be deemed as an excessive demand. My office was advised that the estimated demand that John Nico would place on social services was $120,000 over 5 years, which is $24,000 per year. We were provided with a breakdown of the costs on vocational skills at $5,000, employment programs at $7,000, and day programs at $12,000 per year. Increasing the threshold and exempting the cost of vocational skill training would mean that John Nico would now be under the threshold and be eligible for permanent residence in Canada. I brought this case to the attention of the minister, and it is my most sincere hope that he will use his authority to intervene and do what is right. Shirley's and others like her have shown for a decade that she's good enough to be here, and she has earned her place in Canada and deserves to be reunited with her family. It would be a great injustice if we allow individuals like Shirley to be forced to leave after all this time, after all this waiting, and because of a discriminatory policy that has now been changed. The minister has the opportunity to prevent such gross injustice and to do the right thing and to allow for this family to stay. Under Section 38(1)(c), if the government took that action and applied the new policy to Shirley, then they would be able to stay. I think that it would be reasonable for cases that have just recently been rejected, for example, in the last 12 months, to be assessed under this new policy. This would not produce an excessive demand on our system, Mr. Speaker, and during the committee study, we heard that under the old rules, after appeals and mitigation plans, less than 400 of the 1,000 cases per year flagged under Section 38(1)(c) were ultimately rejected. We have the opportunity to do what's right and to undo the hardships our system has caused for families through a policy we all know was out of step with our values. I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to remind the members of this House that in February I tabled Bill C-398, which repeals Section 38(1)(c). I would like to once again inform the government that I would be happy to work with the government to make this bill their own bill. But most important of all, until that happens, until that discriminatory policy is repealed, the government can do something for the families who's been waiting for years and years and years, and especially for those families who's just been recently rejected, and for the government to apply the new rules to them and to reopen their cases, and so that they have the opportunity to reunite with their families here. It is the right thing to do, and I hope that I can hear a positive response from the government side with respect to this request. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague opposite for her remarks and for the work she does on the committee. As we have said, this government has been in existence for some 40 years, and the measures that we have taken are a step in the right direction. I understand that my colleague would have liked us to have gone farther. We are taking an approach, a balanced approach. We're working with the provinces and territories, consulting on the subject, because we know that it can have an impact, Mr. Speaker, but we have repeated on several occasions, the minister has stated several times that we do want to move ahead to eventually eliminate the policy, but we need to consult the provinces and the territories. We need data, more conclusive data on the issue. So my question for the member is, does she not believe that we should take the time to consult the provinces and territories? For example, the government of BC, the provincial government, which is NDP, Mr. Speaker, which also asked us to take time and consult. We acknowledge that the policy has an impact on families, and that is why we are taking action. And so my question is, should we not be taking the time necessary to consult the provinces and territories on this issue?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Parliamentary Secretary for his comments and question. Let us be clear, the Minister has been consulting on this issue for almost 2 years now, and now they say that they need to continue to consult, and I'm okay with that, really. I would rather the government have done the right thing, knowing that it's the right thing to repeal this provision, this discriminatory provision. At the committee, we also actually learned and heard from officials to say that there are about 1,000 cases under this provision that comes before us, And then it was also stated by committee members, Liberal members at that said that the cost would not be that onerous. Now, that said, the government's made a decision. And I accept that they're the government and they get to make these decisions. What I'm asking today, though, Mr. Speaker, is that for the government to consider applying the new policy to existing cases that have just recently been rejected. It is projected by the government's own officials that in a year, that maybe about 400 cases that fall under that category. The comments that I made about the family of Shirley, where they've been here for 10 years, and they were only just rejected, by the way, with under the old policy of their case in January of this year, and then again in March of this year. So I think it is the right thing to do for the government to reopen her case under the new rules so that she may be assessed under the new rules and be allowed to bring her family here. Otherwise, her son, one of her sons, would...
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I'd like to thank and congratulate my honourable colleague from Vancouver East for a passionate, brilliant, and long overdue proposal that I think ought to be supported by every member of this House. I think Canadians would be shocked to know that we still have embedded in our official immigration law a provision that is so discriminatory, so outmoded, so stereotypical that no modern democracy that exists in a pluralistic society could possibly justify it. And that's a section of our Immigration Act that says that when someone comes here and they work and they fulfill their obligations under a program such as a temporary foreign workers and then seek to sponsor their family, that they and their family members, all of them can be rejected if one of their family members has a certain condition like Down syndrome or deafness or an intellectual disability. And underpinning that is this outmoded notion that these people are somehow a burden. Mr. Speaker, people with Down syndrome, people who are deaf, people with intellectual deficits are not burdens. Okay? These are people that have every ability to be fine citizens and contributing members of our society. And I want to ask my honourable colleague, this typically arises when we have a live-in caregiver who comes here. Does she agree that perhaps what we could do is have a system where caregivers are allowed to bring their spouses and children with them at the beginning when they come here so that we can keep their families intact and get rid of this outmoded system where they're separated from their families only to find 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years later they find that they and their families are then no longer admissible to Canada after doing everything that they are obligated to under the system. Would she agree with that policy?
For Vancouver East.
Well, thank you very much to my colleague, the member from Vancouver Kingsway, for his comments. First off, he's absolutely right. People who have disabilities of any type, they bring more to the community than just their disability. We should not be identifying them by their disability, but by the whole of their persons. And this is something that we do not do under this policy, and it is wrong. The other thing, and is also, by the way, in violation of the UN Convention against people with disabilities, so for people with disabilities. Now, on the issue around what is the right thing to do, I am a long-time proponent of believing in the notion that if you're good enough to work, you're good enough to stay. And that includes caregivers. They are the only group of people under the immigration stream that are separated from their family and have to work 2 years before they can even make an application to bring their family here under the economic class. And that should not be the case. Absolutely, I would agree that those families should be able to bring their families here to Canada on arrival. Nobody, no family, no mother should have to endure what these caregivers have to endure with the separation from their children.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very familiar with the live-in caregiver program. I've been dealing with it for over 25 years as an elected representative, both at the Manitoba legislature and now here in Ottawa. That program was a fantastic program that was introduced many years ago. And yes, there are flaws, and it can be improved. There's no doubt about that. This government has demonstrated its ability to, in fact, improve the system. It wasn't that long ago. We're only talking a year or so ago where we had huge backlogs in terms of processing landed or individuals that are here in Canada as live-in caregivers after they met the requirements, where they would wait years before their application would actually be processed. We have a government, Mr. Speaker, that has been very proactive on the immigration file. And an excellent example of that is the live-in caregiver program. Now we see live-in caregiver program processing being done within the year. That is an amazing difference from when it was when Harper was the Prime Minister of Canada. We now have a program that's allowing more of the types of cases that the individual is actually talking about being accepted, Mr. Speaker. This government is actually moving forward on these very important issues. It was a Liberal administration that created the live-in caregiver program. Prior to that, you would have to come under a working visa, and then after working visa, go back and then apply. This whole program was initiated by a Liberal administration, and we have a Minister of Immigration that has been proactively improving the program and meeting many of the needs in which the member across the way is talking about.
The honourable member for Vancouver East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't hear a question, but let me just say this. With respect to the changes in the program, and yes, there are some welcome news. I'll tell you this. I held many roundtables with caregivers. In fact, with the long wait in processing, I had people literally crying with me and telling me that they've been in the system for 10 years and they've been waiting for their case to be processed and still no action. I brought this up with the previous minister, John McCallum, and then with his current minister, and then I held press conferences and so on. The minister announced a 12-month processing time. I was there at that press conference. And you know what? The minister actually cited the case that I brought to the minister's attention, Joy, who after 10 years finally had her case processed, and he cited why that was wrong, and then he made the changes. So I'm glad that there's some message that's being heard by the government on this front. So I ask for this one piece. The government has brought in a policy to address the issue of discrimination on the basis of disability. This new policy needs to apply for those cases that were just recently rejected. Those people who's waited for 10 years to be reunited, only to be assessed under the old rule with the new rules just around the corner. They will not be able to bring their families here under the old rule. So if we open those cases, we will allow for those families to have an opportunity to be reunited. And by the officials, if people are worried about the floodgates and somehow there'll be thousands of cases that will be coming, it won't. The officials themselves says in a given year, you're looking at about maybe 400 cases. So it is not that many, and it will make such a difference to the lives of people. So I am urging the government to do the right thing here. We can continue to work on this file. I will continue to push for Section 38(1)(c) to be repealed. But in the meantime, until then, let's do something for those families who have suffered so much already, to make their life better and to make those hardships mean something so that they can have their families here reunited with them to make Canada their home.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for allowing me to speak today and to participate in this debate. First of all, I wish to thank my colleagues from the Standing Committee on Immigration for their diligent work in producing this report. I would also like to thank the many witnesses who appeared before the committee who communicated their point of view, their analysis, and their recommendations. As you know, the government looked at this matter to make sure that our policies line up with our country's modern values. The report has a certain number of important recommendations that will help to orient this review. Our goal is to establish a balance between protecting social services funded by the state and humanitarian objectives of the immigration system in Canada. When it comes to the excessive burden, those who are likely to represent a higher burden on our healthcare system, which average Canadians consider to not be admissible to Canada. Our modern values, however, demand inclusiveness. Cases are reviewed individually to determine their potential impact on social services. By evaluating what would be required by the applicant, the cost of services, and impact on the waitlist. Our policy is over 40 years old. There was a certain number of qualified applicants who initially were declared inadmissible to Canada because their children had Down syndrome or had developmental delays. In 2018, Canadians will be able to note that those kinds of decisions
are not in line with a society that prizes itself on its diversity and inclusiveness. Canadians, seeing these services as investments that allow the participation and inclusion of handicapped persons, makes our society more diverse and stronger. We recognize that when a qualified applicant is declared inadmissible because a member of their family has a handicap, we are passing up on qualifications that could be beneficial for our country and its economy. That is why we need policies that are more fair and that promote inclusiveness while continuing to protect social services funded by the state. IRCC reviewed these provisions. In the case of this review, the government looked at the points of view of various stakeholders, including those who defend the rights of disabled persons, among others. The Standing Committee noted that this was an important contribution to the review. We've developed a new approach to implement a policy that will stand the test of time. Pursuant to the committee's recommendations, our government is implementing significant changes to the current policy. This includes removing specialized education services or including particular services, elements which are part of the current policy. This will bring better balance to the fair treatment and protecting healthcare services that are funded by the state, which will be useful for applicants who have handicapped persons in their care. The current policy has sometimes prevented the arrival of newcomers representing relatively low costs who could otherwise bring a contribution to Canada. The intent is to improve fairness in processing immigration requests from those who have health problems. According to the government evaluation, which we shared with our counterparts in provinces and territories, this will have a minimal impact on the healthcare system. We're talking about less than a very minimal amount of cases in Canada. This will permit the arrival of newcomers who, according to the current policy, would otherwise have been refused. Some categories of applicants among refugees or those under familiar policies are dispensed from the excessive burden provision. Applicants in the economic immigration category, those who wish to come to Canada, are part of a class that we admit to Canada because we need their skills for our economy. Of course, we wish to avoid a significant negative impact on provincial healthcare systems. We're going to take additional measures and consult with provinces and territories and take into account the committee's recommendation to remove the provision regarding the excessive burden provision. The government undergoes a rigorous process of collection and analysis of data with its territorial and provincial partners and will mobilize its partners to guarantee that changes are well made. This will allow our government to draw additional conclusions about the possible elimination of the excessive burden provision in its entirety. Pursuant to the recommendation of the committee to complete a review 3 years after implementing these changes, representatives will make themselves available to the committee if they wish to conduct this review. During the time remaining, I wish to talk about some of the recommendations made by the committee when it comes to administering the policy. Improvements on administrative policies and client experience, as well as achieving objectives rapidly. We are currently centralizing applications that have to do with these types of requests into a single office. This will allow us to make more uniform decisions and make better decisions. Our government agrees with the recommendation of the committee considering training of immigration officers and doctors that participate in these decisions. The government will look at existing training to make sure that it harmonizes with the changes made to the policy. The government will undertake expert analysis of the methodology used to set the threshold of excessive burden and will ensure that this is transparent to applicants and the public. This way, certain services will no longer be taken into account under the revised policy. IRCC will review its cost threshold. The government is determined to ensure that the policy regarding accessibility and immigration applicants meets the needs of protecting health, education, and social services while treating all applicants equally. The changes being made by our government to the excessive burden provision will establish a fair balance and reflects the values of a modern country wishing to include individuals with handicaps. The committee's work was a very important component in the government's review regarding the excessive burden provision. We agree with its intention. These recommendations are constructive, well thought out, and extremely useful. I wish to thank them again for their work. Our government is pleased to see its continued work in this field, and we are hoping that our immigration system will continue to evolve in order to remain in line with the values of a modern Canadian society. Once again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to this important issue. Once again, we want to have a balanced approach, consult with provinces and territories and different stakeholders to make sure that perhaps one day we'll be able to remove the excessive burden policy entirely and no longer have to deal with a 40-year-old policy as we have in the past. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Parliamentary Secretary for his comments. I have a simple question for him. In my speech, I asked the question whether or not the government would consider applying the new policy to recently rejected cases, those individuals, let's say in the last 12 months, that's just been rejected, to apply this new policy to them in assessing their case and to reopen the case, not make them to go through a new application process, but to apply the new policy to them and to reopen the case and to allow for that assessment under the new rules.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for the question. We've hoped to improve this policy. We will continue to make changes to this policy. What I wish to say in response is that the cases in the system will be analyzed under the new policy. We have held discussions with the department so that in certain cases where we might apply different analysis, I wish to assure you that the cases currently in the system will be reviewed with the new policy. We want this policy to take into account the needs of handicapped persons in the country. We have removed certain provisions. We think that a greater number of people will be able to come to Canada under this new policy. We will continue working together to make sure that this policy will one day is entirely eliminated.
Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question for the Parliamentary Secretary is simply whether or not the government intends on voting to concur this report in. Thank you.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank my colleague for the question. Once again, I think that the changes that we've made to this policy are a step in the right direction. These are changes that are more modern. Once again, we've taken into account the recommendations of certain groups to review this policy. We've tripled the threshold. We removed provisions such as rehabilitation services, which were no longer considered necessary in evaluating certain applications. Once again, we will continue to work closely with the provinces and territories to ensure that we have reliable data to make sure that to see if this policy can one day be eliminated completely. We will all work together to make sure that we achieve this goal. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Vancouver East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I acknowledge in the minister's office on Sunday night, just this past Sunday night, sent my office a email informing me that in answer to the question that I've put to him about whether or not the new policy would apply to existing cases. So I did get an email on Sunday night telling me in the affirmative that that would be the case. And I am happy with that, and I thank the minister for that decision. Now, my question here is very specific. For the cases that have just recently been rejected, in the case of Shirley, she only just got her case rejected as recent as March of this year. I am asking whether or not the government will allow for the reconsideration of these cases with the new rules. It makes a big difference to them if they have to reapply anew under the humanitarian compassionate grounds process or any other stream. It would mean that their children who are older that have aged out would not be able to become part of that application. In those families, they have waited for 10 years to be reunited, and they would have been approved under this new policy. If we make them put in a new application, they will lose one of their child, and they would have to leave that child behind. I think that's wrong. I hope that the member would agree that that's wrong. I hope the government would agree that's wrong. So my question is, will the government apply the new rules to the recently rejected cases?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et comme je l'ai dit dans mon discours.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I said in my speech, and as I will say again, the cases that are currently in the system will be analyzed and reviewed under the new policy. Now, retroactive cases won't be, but they can reapply under the new policy. And we think that with the new policies that we set up in the policy, like tripling the cost, for example, of certain services, and having new readaptation services, for example, we think that those people will be able to greatly benefit from our policy review. And they will probably be accepted under the new policy and these new measures. So, Mr. Speaker, I would be pleased to discuss that point with my colleague at any point. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Vancouver East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And so I accept that. With the exception of this, and I hope that the member understands the difference, for those in the families, those families who have to apply anew under the new rules and make a new application, the children, the older children who are older than 22, older than 21, would have aged out. They would not qualify to be part of that family unit. That is the difference. This is what I'm trying to get at, to not bring in a new policy to actually qualify these individuals, only to break the family up, because that is what will happen. If you make those individuals, if the government, my apologies, make those individuals make a new application, it will break the family up because the older children would have aged out and cannot be part of the application process. If the intent is to allow for them to apply anyway, then why not make them whole and allow for those families to come together as a unit simply by opening and reopening their cases for reconsideration? And I'm not talking about retroactive for 30 years. I'm only talking about the recent cases to which, according to the officials, there are no more than 400 in a year on average.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration.
Monsieur le Président, je vais répéter.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'll repeat what I said before. Once again, the cases that are currently in the system will be evaluated under the new policy. The cases that are retroactive will not be, but once again, people will be able to apply with the new rules. So we believe sincerely, Mr. Speaker, that the people who reapply under the new measures will have a greater chance of being accepted with these new provisions. Again, the cost was tripled, there are new services, and so on. So once again, Mr. Speaker, this is a step in the right direction. This is a policy that was over 40 years old, and we want to make sure that persons with disabilities who want to come to Canada are able to do so. They make great contributions to our society, and as I said before in my speech, preventing a family from coming from Canada because their child has Down syndrome or autism, for example, just doesn't make sense with today's values. That's why we've adopted these new measures, and we will continue down that road to completely change that policy. Thank you.
Time for one more question and response. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm wondering if my colleague would maybe just highlight some of the changes that, in fact, we have done within the program that ultimately reducing, for example, the processing times to a year. So prior, under the Stephen Harper, for example, people would wait years in order to be able to get processed as a live-in caregiver after they've actually met the criteria, Mr. Speaker. That is a significant change where we're now doing it in 12 months. And the other is in terms of just dealing with many of the types of cases that the member across the way is referring to, we've even advanced that particular issue also. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All Parliamentary Secretary.
Je remercie mon collègue pour la question.
Thank my colleague for the question, Mr. Speaker. And yes, as he said, when it comes to caregivers, we have significantly reduced the times for reuniting families. Same thing for family reunification. It went from 26 months under the old government to 12 months under ours. We've made proactive changes to the Department of Immigration. So there are a number of new files there, and we want to have a more customer-oriented service to make it easier to apply, for example, to simplify family reunification. So I think that the changes that we've made since we came to power are good changes, and they will allow families to be reunited faster. That's what we want, and we also want to make sure that some of those families can come to Canada even if there is someone in their family who has a disability. That's why this policy reflects our values and it reflects the right thing to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to my colleagues. Like the Parliamentary Secretary, I would like to thank witnesses who appeared before the committee to provide testimony for the content of this report, and I also would like to thank all of my fellow colleagues on the committee who undertook a very rigorous study of this. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party of Canada did append a dissenting report to this report on behalf of the party, which is the official opposition. And I guess what I'll do today is I'll just highlight some of the differences of opinion that our party had and some of the similarities that we had with the main recommendations that were put forward. I believe the New Democratic Party also put forward a dissenting opinion too, although I could be wrong on that. Perhaps my colleague will correct me or remind me. Just for anyone who is watching and for the purpose of debate, the content of this study was on the medical inadmissibility and excessive demand regulations for potential newcomers. In particular, the committee reviewed clause 38(1)(c) of the Immigration Refugee Protection Act, which states that a foreign national is inadmissible on health grounds if their health condition might be reasonably expected to cause excessive demand on health or social services. After a careful examination of the limited evidence made available to us at the committee, members on the committee in my party were left with many unanswered questions and lacking data. But nonetheless, we wanted to state that it is clear that there are ways that current regulations could be better applied and that Canada's immigration system must strike the right balance of protecting the health and social services that Canadians rely on and ensuring excessive demand clause is not hindering our ability to attract and retain immigrants. And we felt that the committee's report, the main body that was adopted, was lacking in this regard, and it's in that context that we submitted the dissenting report. Canada is a generous and welcoming country. Since Confederations, millions have immigrated to Canada to start a new life, get a job, open a business, raise a family, or escape persecution. Our country has been enriched by the multicultural nature of our communities and has warmly embraced the diversity of our citizens. In order to continue to welcome immigrants to Canada, the general public must support the overall objectives of our immigration system. Everyday Canadians need to trust that the system is efficient and benefiting the country. Throughout the study, the committee discovered many flaws and irregularities with the application of existing medical inadmissibility regulations. The committee heard suggestions on how to improve the service delivery. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I'm just going to turn this down. How to improve the service delivery on the department and how the department, IRCC, can update unnecessary and confusing bureaucratic language during the application process. Throughout our meetings, questions were frequently based on the question of fairness in the context of competing interests. And some of these were, if demand for specialized services was increased due to a total removal of the excessive demand provision, would that be fair to Canadians who have already waited months on a wait list? Would it be fair to provinces and territories that are already having cash issues in terms of their budget? Or is it fair to deny an individual who wants to immigrate to come to Canada but was rejected because either they or someone in their family was determined to cause excessive demand on our health or social services? So in terms of the excessive demand clause, one of the things that I actually had some questions about was the committee had a lot of difficulty finding any sort of modeling or quantitative data on what the projected increase in demand if the clause 38(1)(c) was repealed. In terms of, we could look back, there was even the data that was available for past years. I remember the chair, Mr. Speaker, in the committee having to sort of really ask a lot of questions of officials on how the numbers were calculated because it's sort of a confusing formula. But one of the things that we asked over and over again was, okay, well, if this clause was repealed, would there be an increase in demand that's not forecasted based on previous year's number because there were people who were deselecting from the application process because they knew that they would not be they would not be eligible under the current clause, as I mentioned earlier, clause 38(1)(c). So without that data, I think it's difficult for provinces to forecast what the demand, the future demand on the provincial healthcare system would be. So we noted that in our dissenting report, and we also noted the fact that at that time, there was still a consultation ongoing with the provincial governments that the minister hadn't made available to the committee. There were only a few committees that actually put forward their recommendations, and there were several provinces that were very hesitant and critical about the flat-out repeal of 38(1)(c) as is recommended in the report, due to questions around the potential cost and whether or not Ottawa would be footing the bill, as it were. So to me, again, I want to ensure that the system is fair and that we're not losing people due to this provision. On the other hand, without the data of understanding what the potential demand could be or how we're going to pay for that demand, that lack of data was not congruent with some of the recommendations in the report, and we tried to outline that logic very soundly in the dissenting report as well, too. So the other component that was, there was a business case that was sort of made saying, well, if we had just repealed this clause, then we would remove all the bureaucratic costs associated with processing these applications. But again, because we didn't have the data in terms of anticipated demand on the healthcare system, and in fact, even with the government's current changes, I'm not sure that we have the data on what the demand on the healthcare system was, and I think that the provincial government are still asking those questions. It's very difficult to sort of make that argument, right? Because you can't look at the, one basket of costs to the other without that modeling being done. So in terms of determining excessive demand costs, I wanted to read through some of our thoughts on that. An individual medical assessment must be undertaken to determine excessive demand. This is to ensure every individual's current and future health and social service needs are taken into consideration. The Canadian Bar Association provided the committee with 2 briefs and appeared in person to provide recommendations. In the evidence submitted to the committee, they outlined the challenges associated with how IRCC calculates the cost to determine if someone is projected to cause an excessive demand on health and social services. The difficulty in estimating the costs for special education needs were brought to the committee's attention. As education is provincial jurisdiction, no 2 provinces are identical in how they determine funding levels to assist students with special education needs. For example, Ontario's inclusive education model funding is different than how Manitoba supports special education needs, as every school division is unique in how support is provided to students with special needs. there's also a discrepancy between provinces with financial support for prescription drugs. In some provinces, medically required services are covered in full, while outpatient drug costs are not automatically covered. There are also disparities in the amount of what each province reimburses residents for various prescription drugs. The CEBA noted that the IRCC Central Medical Admissibility Unit, which was recently introduced, might alleviate some of the challenges in determining the true costs of whether or not one would cause an excessive demand. However, they were urging IRCC to improve its medical officer's handbook and to work with provincial and territorial government to get the most up-to-date costing information available for the intended place of residence of the applicant. Denying applicants based on irrelevant information is not acceptable, and all steps must be taken to ensure the accuracy of cost estimates. Furthermore, there were circumstances where IRCC took so long to review a medical assessment that it was deemed out of date. Due to IRCC's wait times for processing excessive demands applications, 886 applications needed a new independent medical assessment, and it was in our opinion that this is unacceptable, and IRCC needs to improve its service delivery if medical assessments are not being reviewed in a timely manner. And I don't think that was actually addressed in the government's response. So certainly that was something that we wanted to see. In terms of the procedural fairness letter, there were also several comments made from witnesses about the confusion around the procedural fairness letters, and they often don't provide enough information for the applicant in a meaningful way. Many circumstances and the language used in these letters is overly bureaucratic and difficult for an applicant to decipher. And because IRCC mails procedural fairness letters, the time it takes for a physical letter to arrive cuts into the already short 60 days that applicants are given to provide an answer. We are informed due to the time delays with mailing a letter to various parts of the globe, it's difficult for an applicant to respond. Same thing, I'll be brief, Mr. Speaker, the mitigation plans. We heard a lot of testimony around, sort of the nebulousness of the mitigation plan. We didn't actually look at a template mitigation plan, even though it was discussed in broad strokes what one might include. We thought that it would be helpful to review how IRCC communicates what is expected in an applicant's mitigation plan. Our aim would be for IRCC to provide as much guidance as possible for applicants to improve the level of information received and to decrease the amount of appeal. So our conclusion in the dissenting report was that it's evident that numerous provinces have hesitations on completely eliminating the excessive demand clause, which was one of the key recommendations of the report. Yet numerous concerns were raised with the implementation of current policy. So we did state that our job as policymakers is to strike the right balance of protecting our health and social services while also meeting Canada's immigration needs. We want our immigration policies to be fair and compassionate, but we also firmly believe that Canadians must trust and support the overall immigration system. And this is where, again, Mr. Speaker, that lack of data was, when you're talking about potentially adding costs to Canada's healthcare system, we are in a significant deficit situation, as are many provincial governments. I do think that it's worthwhile for us to look at that modeling, especially when there were, very anecdotal and very, and I want to be perfectly clear, there were some very heartbreaking stories that were brought forward to the committee. But as policymakers, we also have to say, what is the overall likely demand that is going to be created by the repeal of 38(1)(c)? There were some anecdotal stories about the fact that if this was repealed, we would, the conclusion was made that we would have, more economic immigrants that were highly successful. There wasn't really any data brought forward to back up that claim as well, too. So overall, we did feel that there was a lack of data to really analyze the cost of repealing 38(1)(c), and then subsequent to that, it's difficult to question the government on how they would plan to finance that particular change. And what, certainly as a conservative, I have great hesitancy on just putting forward major changes that might affect provincial spending without that particular piece of information. So in closing, the recommendations that we put forward in our dissenting report, that any change to 38(1)(c) of IRPA must be done in full consultation with the provinces and territories, that provinces and territories be given a formal procedure to waive the excessive demand clause for an applicant they deem as essential for their province and where they accept the costs associated with the applicant, that IRCC create a process where the provinces and territories on a yearly basis provide the most up-to-date costing information for health and social services to improve the accuracy when determining excessive demand cases. Furthermore, we recommended that this costing information be made public and accessible, that IRCC take necessary steps to eliminate delays that result in an applicant needing new independent medical assessments through no fault of their own, for example, by digitizing the process. That the IRCC immediately work to simplify procedural fairness letters to ensure that they are easy to understand and expected outcomes are clear to the applicant. That IRCC involve provinces and territories to review the efficacy of mitigation plans, including an exploration of enforcement mitigation plans to measure their success and cost avoidance, and that IRCC review its training process to ensure that officers were aware of their obligation to provide a detailed breakdown of the expedited costs and social services. So we did provide a fairly robust and I think balanced dissenting report. I would hope that as we go forward, the Parliamentary Secretary today has said that the government is committed to reviewing their plan in the future. I would like to see some formal modeling of any sort of increased demand be included in that review to understand whether or not how much extra burden this is being placed on provincial healthcare system in combination with that data around economic migration. And also much of the report didn't talk about some of those administrative changes that could be made in order to perhaps streamline the system for applicants as well. So with that, that was the opinion of the Conservative Party of Canada, and certainly in terms of this concurrence debate, that opinion would stand. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for her comments. Just to answer her question in her speech about whether or not the NDP put forward a dissenting opinion, yes, we did. And our dissenting opinions had two recommendations. One was for the government to repeal sections 38(1)(c), and then the other one was to work with the provincial and territorial governments with respect to ensuring that they would be resourced accordingly coming out of this this provision. Now, with that being said, I understand that the Conservatives' point of view, but I am asking this question, though. The government has put in a new policy, and would she support the concept of allowing for those who have just recently been rejected, to which, according to officials, there are no more than 400 cases approximately a year, and for the government to reopen those cases and apply the new policy to them, and particularly to address the issue for those families who, if they're forced to make a new application, their children who are older, who have aged out, will not be part of that family unit and would therefore have to suffer the consequences of making a decision of having their family separated once again.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
I thank my colleague for her question and clarification on the status of their dissenting report. In order to be able to answer that question as a policymaker, I would want to know what the total cost impact would be by province, and whether or not the provincial governments would be supportive of incurring that cost.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for her remarks and for her work on committee. A simple question, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to know her position, if she thinks that denying an application by someone who has Down syndrome or another illness, disease, if we should be denying or refusing people, rejecting them based on reasons like that.
As I said in my speech, Mr. Speaker, we expect our immigration policies to be fair and compassionate. We believe that Canadians should trust and support the overall immigration system, and that we need to ensure that as policymakers we're striking the right balance between protecting our health and social services. We're also meeting Canada's immigration needs.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Development.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for her speech. I've had an opportunity in Whitby to speak with a resident, Mark Wafer, who hires many individuals who have disabilities, and I've done a couple of consultations, and the one thing that people with disabilities talk about is their willingness to work and the capacity for them to do more than adequate work and actually increase the bottom line for a lot of companies. So while my colleague talks about the cost, there's also a benefit that these individuals will bring to Canada's economy while having them here. So I think that, does she not agree that this particular approach of the government is a logical first step, and that I agree that there is room to improve, to continue to talk to the provinces and territories, but this has a benefit as well to Canadians.
The honourable member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly support ensuring that people with disabilities, especially such as autism, one of my colleagues here has an autistic son, and he does a lot of very good work on behalf of the community. But I would, in answer to my colleague's question, I would remind her that just over a year ago, she voted against an opposition motion to reverse the Prime Minister's cold-hearted decision to reject the Canadian Autism Partnership. So I find it very rich that she would stand up here and make comments about cost-benefit after her government has racked up a lot of debt and refused to fund the Canadian Autism Partnership. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Vancouver East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank again the members' comments. I would say this, in terms of an individual, I think the worth of an individual is more than the disability, and that we need to actually look at the individual on the whole and not to see a person with disability as a cost issue. Now, on this issue, the other thing that I think people should know, if they're not aware, is that the cost-benefit analysis, so the government calls it that, they do not take into the benefit side to this analysis. There is no benefit analysis to this equation. It's only the cost issue. And then to the member's response to my question, there are only 400 cases approximately per year, and then not all of them, by the way, would necessarily fall under the category that would fit with the policy, with the new policy. So spread across the country, I would say that the cost, if you will, to the provinces and territories would be negligible. I would say that, and I would ask the member to take that into consideration.
The honourable member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
As I said earlier in my speech, that particular data was not made available to the committee, which is why we noted that in the dissenting report. And to reiterate, I do believe that our immigration policy should be fair and compassionate, and certainly our job as policymakers is to strike the right balance of protecting our health and social services while also meeting Canada's immigration needs.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Part of the question I think that I was going to pose may have been already answered, but I want to, first of all, congratulate my colleague on the great work that she has done on behalf of refugees and immigrants coming into Canada. I think she's done a stellar job of drawing attention to some of the most oppressed people on our planet, and that's what we want on this side of the House, want to show is compassion to those. But, Mr. Speaker, my understanding is that during the committee study, there was some difficulty in obtaining data regarding to the cost of various policy options relating to medical inadmissibility. And I'm just wondering if my colleague could just provide more detail as to what exactly was the data that was missing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
So, Mr. Speaker, there were sort of two streams of policy alternatives that the committee discussed. Or sort of that I heard in terms of witness testimony, either fully repealing Section 38(1)(c) or making a wide variety of changes to the existing policy. And the government has made some changes. There are some things, as I mentioned in my speech, I would like to see that I think would actually reduce the administrative burden on people who are trying to enter this process. But in terms of data, I just want to reiterate, I fully support. I mean, we heard some cases that were just really difficult, and we want to approach policy changes with that heart for compassion. But I did find it interesting that we went to CIHI, we went to some pretty robust sources for health data, and we couldn't get any sort of modeling that would say what is the long-term extended provision, like what is the long-term potential demand on the system going to be. And that's not to say whether or not we would have supported that, but if you are going to make a change like that, it's incumbent upon the government to make plans to pay for it. We are stewards of taxpayer dollars here, so while we have an obligation to be compassionate to protect the most vulnerable, the other side of the equation that many of us in here almost often forget is that we have to pay for things, and it's not us paying for things, it's Canadians paying for things. So we want to ensure that we're compassionate. We also want to make sure that we have plans to see sustainability in the social programs that Canadians depend upon. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Development.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. And because my honourable colleague brought in my voting record on autism, I voted against that because there was money going to a particular organization. But I would remind her that in Budget 2018, we provided over $20 million to various autism agencies that we have continued to advocate for. And my background in neurological research lends that to ensuring that we do support individuals and families with autism. But I'd go back to my previous question, and I know that it's not just about a cost and benefit when you're talking about people with disabilities, but asking her again, don't you think that there is a benefit to having individuals and not just a cost to having individuals with disabilities coming into Canada? And although we could continue to work with provinces and territories, it still is a granted and compassionate first step to ensure that individuals have an opportunity to come here and contribute to our economy.
Well, member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
The logical fallacy in my colleague's argument is that she's making an assertion which I did not make. I do believe that Canada's asylum or our entire immigration system should think about compassion. It should think about how we meet the needs of Canada's economy through immigration, and it should support. And certainly, we should have initiatives that support and ensure the fulsome participation in every aspect of Canada for people who have disabilities. We should not be, looking at programming or policy that is going to put barriers in place for people who already have barriers every day. And this again is why, the member opposite voted against a motion which, I think, I'm looking at my colleague, I think it was about $2.3 million, my colleague from Edmonton who does a lot of autism research or work for autism, they voted against this. And, I have to, for my colleague opposite to stand and take credit for this, it was actually my colleague who has done years of work, probably went to 1 million community meetings, put pressure on the government to get some acknowledgement for this in the massive deficit bajillionaire budget. So, I don't think there's a single Liberal here who can stand in this House and take any credit for the work on autism participation in the Canadian economy without looking across the aisle and giving credit to my colleague from Edmonton. Thank you.
Resuming debate. Reprise de débat. Is the House ready for the question? La Chambre est-elle prête à se prononcer? The question is as follows. Ms. Kwan, seconded by Ms. Blaney, North Island Powell River, moved that the 15th report of the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration, presented on Wednesday, December 13th, 2017, be concurred in. Plaît-il à la Chambre d'adopter cette...
Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion?
Que tout ce qui...
All those in favor of the motion will please say yea.
Que tout ce qui...
All those opposed to the motion will please say nay.
À mon avis, les oui.
In my view, the yeas have it.
Convoquez les députés.
Call in the members.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the vote be deferred until Tuesday, May 22nd, 2018, at the expiry of the time provided for oral questions.
Accordingly, the recorded division stands deferred until Tuesday, May 22nd, 2018, at the expiry of the time provided for oral questions. La Chambre va maintenant...
The House will now continue with the rest of its work under routine proceedings, and we are at motions.
Yeah. Presenting petitions. Présentation de pétitions. L'honorable député de Trois-Rivières.
The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to table the first part of a long series of petitions that are in response to the Minister of Transport who appeared in Trois-Rivières with respect to trains, high-frequency trains. And after 25 years of waiting, it's more than high time to bring the train back to Trois-Rivières to contribute to economic development, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that in this most densely populated corridor between Quebec and Windsor, people are ready to do their share.
Presenting petitions. Présentation de pétitions. The Honourable Member for Oakville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to present a petition today signed by Canadians requesting that Parliament support Bill C-316, an act to amend the Canada Revenue Agency regarding organ donors. Today, there are 4,500 Canadians awaiting a life-saving organ or tissue transplant. The majority of Canadians support organ and tissue donation, but only 25% are registered as donors. Bill C-316 will make it easier for Canadians to indicate their desire to donate their organs and tissues through their annual tax return. This information would then be shared with the provincial and territorial governments so that the names of those Canadians who want to help save lives can be added to existing donor registries. Thank you.
Presenting petitions. Présentation de pétitions. Questions on the order paper. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Speaker, I would ask that all questions be allowed to stand at this time, please.
Is that agreed? Agreed? Agreed and so ordered. It's my duty, pursuant to Standing Order 38, to inform the House that the questions to be raised tonight at the time of adjournment are as follows. The Honourable Member for Calgary-Shepherd in respect to foreign investment, the Honourable Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan regarding foreign affairs, and the Honourable Member de l'Honorable Député.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte on infrastructure.
Order du jour, orders of the day. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader was rising.
It's okay, Mr. Speaker. I don't believe there's notices of motions today. So,
but that's correct. We are on different hours today, but that I believe is reserved for the Wednesday routine proceedings. So we'll now go to orders of the day. Order du jour.
Government orders, government bills, comments.
Reading of Bill C-76, Elections Modernization Act.
Mr. Bryson for Ms. Gould, seconded by Ms. Philpott, moves that Bill C-76, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act and other acts and to make certain consequential amendments, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs debate and the Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to kick off debate at second reading on Bill C-76, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act.
Stronger when more Canadians, not fewer, are able to participate in our elections. And our government believes that democratic institutions and election rules must keep pace with changes in society and the expectations of our citizens. The Elections Modernization Act is an important step forward for our democracy and for Canadians' ability to participate in and trust our democratic institutions. The changes we're proposing under the Elections Modernization Act will make the electoral process more accessible to all Canadians, will help modernize the administration and enforcement of election rules, will make the electoral process more secure and transparent, protect the integrity of the Canadian electoral system, while better protecting the personal information and privacy of Canadian citizens.
We believe that the strength of our democracy depends on participation by a larger number of Canadians, as many people as possible.
Speaker, the previous government passed the Fair Elections Act. This was a regressive piece of legislation that former Chief Electoral Officer Mark Mayrand said contained measures that, quote, would undermine its stated purpose and will not serve Canadians well. 160 academics signed a National Post editorial stating that the Fair Elections Act would, and again I quote, damage the institution at the heart of our country's democracy, voting in federal elections. The Globe and Mail ran 5 editorial board pieces pleading with the Conservatives to reconsider this legislation. Mr. Speaker, the Harper Conservatives did not listen to reason. They did not pay attention to evidence, and Canadians paid the price. Since the passage of the so-called Fair Elections Act, we saw the disenfranchisement of more than 170,000 Canadian voters who lacked sufficient identification. That's according to Stats Canada. We saw it become more difficult for Canadians to get information about where, when, and how to vote. We saw it became easier for elections lawbreakers to actually evade punishment. Now, unlike the Conservatives, we're listening to Canadians, and we want Canadians to be able to participate in our democracy.
By eliminating the unfair aspects of the Harper government's act, we will facilitate the voting process for all Canadians.
To introduce the Elections Modernization Act on behalf of our government. Not only will it undo these controversial aspects of the Conservative so-called Fair Elections Act, but it will strengthen our democratic institutions by making voting more accessible to millions of Canadians who have previously faced unfair barriers.
I will illustrate some of the proposed changes by focusing on 4 categories of voters: Canadians with disabilities, women and men in the Canadian Armed Forces, Canadian citizens living abroad, and those who do not have the required identification cards under the Act.
Disabilities are better able to participate in our democracy. C-76 confirms existing accessibility practices and further requires accommodations measures to be available to all persons with disabilities, regardless of the nature of that disability. C-76 will create financial incentives for political parties and candidates to accommodate electors with disabilities. These could include providing election material in accessible formats or adding wheelchair ramps to campaign offices as examples. Makes changes to election expense provisions that candidates with disabilities or candidates who are also caregivers for young, sick, or disabled loved ones will find it easier to run for office. Mr. Speaker, the overwhelming enthusiasm for this legislation is obvious in the House today. For these individuals, costs related to the caregiving can be paid from either personal or campaign expenses and will not count against spending limits. These expenses will be reimbursed at up to 90%. Now, Mr. Speaker, the excitement is building.
It's a great thing to do.
Mr. Speaker, Canadian Forces members make tremendous sacrifices defending our democracy. It only makes sense that we make sure they are able to participate in it as well. In the most recent election, 68% of Canadian electors voted. Among members of the Canadian Forces, the participation rate was only 46%. This bill will give Canadian Forces personnel the same flexibility as other Canadians in choosing how to cast their vote. Canadians living abroad are no less dedicated to our country than those who reside within its borders. Yet many are not able to vote, and this bill restores voting rights to more than 1 million Canadians living abroad by removing the provisions that electors cannot have resided outside of Canada for more than 5 years and must have an intent to return. Debates in the last Parliament highlighted a 4th group of Canadians who have challenges when it comes to participating in elections. These are citizens who do not have the required identification. The previous government stopped the use of voter information cards as an allowable piece of ID to establish residency. This happened despite Elections Canada's observation that some 4 million potential Canadians, for instance, do not possess a driver's license. Canadians impacted most by the Conservatives' regressive law change included university students, Indigenous peoples, and in some cases seniors who live in long-term retirement facilities. We will restore voting rights to these Canadians, and we will restore the practice of vouching for identity and residence. This will help bring eligible voters back into our electoral process. Those who vouch for others will continue to be required to make a solemn declaration and will not be able to vouch for more than one person. Now, Conservatives may try to say that this will make it easier for non-citizens to vote, but, Mr. Speaker, this is simply not the case. In his 2011 compliance report for Elections Canada, Harry Newfield, an independent elections expert, recommended, quote, widening the use of voter information cards as a valid piece of address identification for all voters, end quote. To ensure that only Canadian citizens are able to vote, this bill authorizes the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship to provide the Chief Electoral Officer with information about permanent residents and foreign nationals living in Canada. This will help ensure that only Canadian citizens are included in the register of electors and will help to create a more accurate and up-to-date list of voters. The bill also grants the Commissioner of Elections Canada the ability to impose a financial penalty to individuals who vote when they are not able to do so. Mr. Speaker, today Canadians are busier than ever. They work irregular hours, they do shift work, they travel for business and pleasure, they have parenting and caregiver responsibilities that start before dawn and end late in the evening. As a result, more and more Canadians vote in advance polls. And we will increase the hours during which these polls are open, again, to provide more flexibility and to enable more Canadians to participate in the electoral process. This bill will also restore the Chief Electoral Officer's authority to conduct public education and information activities to help inform Canadians about the voting process. Through this bill, we are empowering young Canadians to pre-register for elections so that when they turn 18, they are automatically registered to vote. As well, this bill will make it easier to hire Canadians aged 16 to 18 as election officers, again, giving them an opportunity to get engaged earlier in the electoral process. Mr. Speaker, while we're making it easier for Canadians to vote, we're also making it more difficult for elections lawbreakers to evade punishment. The bill strengthens the powers of the Commissioner of Canada Elections and offers a wider range of remedies for enforcement. Through the bill, the Commissioner will again report to the Chief Electoral Officer and will have new powers to impose administrative monetary penalties for minor violations of the law, have the authority to lay charges, and will be able to apply for a court order to compel testimony during investigation of election offences. Budget 2018 also provides $7.1 million to support the work of the Office of the Commissioner of Canada Elections. This funding will help ensure that the Canadian electoral process continues to uphold the highest standards of democracy. In
2017, the Prime Minister asked the Minister of Democratic Institutions to accept a broad mandate to reinforce openness and fairness of Canada's public institutions. Part of this mandate had to tackle the influence of foreign actors and to look at emerging technologies.
Burlington, my predecessor and soon-to-be successor in the role of Minister of Democratic Institutions, asked CSC, the Canadian Security Establishment, to conduct a study on cyber threats to our democratic processes. This first-of-its-kind public report found that there was no evidence of nation-states interfering in the 2015 Canadian election, but that there has been an upward trend in cyber threat activity against democratic processes globally. So, Mr. Speaker, we take that report seriously, and in fact it indicated that it found that over a 12-month period, 13% of elections globally had some level of foreign interference. So we recognize the seriousness of this threat. We cannot afford to ignore these threats. In fact, we've got a responsibility to defend the integrity of our electoral system. We are moving forward to protect our democratic institutions from cyber threats and foreign interference. And in Budget 2018, the Government of Canada provided approximately $750 million for the creation of a new Canadian Centre for Cyber Security. Budget 2018 also sets aside more than $100 million over the next 5 years for the creation of a national cybercrime coordination unit. These organizations will bring together expertise from across government, coordinate investigations, and protect and defend our government and democratic institutions from cyber threats. The bill before us, Bill C-76, takes a step forward also in terms of addressing potential manipulation of social media by prohibiting the malicious use of computers where there is an intent to obstruct, interfere, or interrupt with the lawful use of computer data during an election period. Current provisions of the Canada Elections Act that deal with publishing false statements are, according to the Commissioner of Canada Elections, unenforceable. This bill before us would narrow the focus to information about criminal records and biographical information. A new provision would prohibit distribution of material intended to mislead the public as to its source. Most importantly, we are closing the loophole that has previously allowed foreign entities to spend money in Canadian elections. As a result of news reports earlier this year, Canadians are rightly concerned about the way private corporations use their personal information for political ends. I want to reassure Canadians that in Canada, these corporations are already regulated under the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Data Act, PIPEDA. But that does not mean our work is done. Through this bill, we are requiring for the first time that political parties be transparent about the steps they are taking to protect Canadians' personal information. C-76 requires political parties to have a publicly available privacy policy addressing a series of privacy issues in terms of how a party collects or gathers data, how it uses data, how it shares data. A party that does not meet these criteria will face deregistration by Elections Canada. I also hope that colleagues on the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, PROC, will revisit their study of privacy in political parties and provide recommendations on the issue. I believe it was less than a year ago that PROC took a look at this issue and recommended no changes, but I think all members and members from all parties would recognize that the ground has shifted on this issue and that it does bear a revisiting by PROC in terms of, and PROC representing all the parties. I think it makes a great deal of sense for PROC to be the vehicle to do a deeper dive on this. Some of the measures in this legislation may be familiar to members of the House as they were introduced previously in Bill C-33. This underscores the breadth and depth of input and advice that has gone into the bill before us. This bill has also benefited from the input of the Minister of National Defence and the Minister of Sport and persons with disabilities. I'd like to thank all of them for their work. I want to thank parliamentarians who contributed to this at PROC. Also, of course, Elections Canada. 85% of the recommendations from Elections Canada after the last election are in fact incorporated into this bill. The report's findings after the last election are very much at the heart of this bill. And again, I want to thank PROC, who have conducted a detailed analysis of the Chief Electoral Officer's report. Our government is committed to strengthening Canada's democratic institutions. We're committed to maintaining the trust of Canadians in our democratic processes. Bill C-76 advances that agenda, and I urge honourable members to move expeditiously on it so that it can be in place for the October 2019 general election. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Banff Airdrie.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to be able to have an opportunity to debate this piece of legislation more officially in this House. We've obviously had a chance to have some back and forth in question period, but we'll now have the chance to do that here in official debate in the House of Commons. Obviously, a number of things, that I find of concern, but I think the biggest concern I have here is, you've got a Liberal government that, with this Prime Minister, seems to continually be trying to find ways to advantage themselves, to find ways to prevent opposition, to find ways to tip the scales in their favour. And we've seen that a number of times, whether it be breaking their promise on electoral reform, whether it be trying to change the rules of this House of Commons to suit themselves. And we see some more of that potentially here in this piece of legislation as well. But I want to focus in specifically on this topic and ask the Minister this question. And it's a topic that we had a bit of an exchange on in question period earlier today, but to talk about the idea of spending limits, if you can just allow me another 30 seconds, maybe, Mr. Speaker. They're making some changes, obviously, that would prevent political parties from being able to use the funds that have been freely given to them by Canadians in a period prior to the election. But they're not doing the same for government advertising and ministerial travel, at least not for the same time period. So I wonder if the minister would commit to making changes to this bill that would line those periods up so that they wouldn't be disadvantaging opposition parties in such a way, and that they would actually align those timelines up so that those directives in terms of the limits on ministerial travel and government advertising would be the same. I wonder if you'd make a commitment to making that amendment today.
Honourable Minister for Democratic Institutions.
Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question and for his work on the whole area of democratic institutions. First of all, one of the first things we did as a government was bring in a new advertising policy. That was back in the spring of 2016, actually. And that advertising policy, among other things, would ban and has banned our government and future governments from engaging in quasi-partisan political type advertising with tax dollars. And the previous government did a lot of that, and we didn't think it was right, so we followed through as a government. But secondly, that advertising policy also would apply the same restrictions on government advertising that apply during the writ period to the period of 90 days leading up to the writ. And that prevents a governing party, ours and future governing parties, from using that period leading up to the election to engage in government advertising that is actually focused on promoting the governing party. We don't think it's right to do that. In fact, Mr. Speaker, we've also cut government advertising quite significantly over the previous government, but we think the steps we have taken are actually in the interests of fair and open elections.
I note that there is a lot of interest in posing questions and comments to the Minister. I'm going to ask all members to keep their interventions no more than a minute. Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
It's a pleasure to join this debate. It's a long looked-for debate because, if you'll recall, 18 months ago, the Liberals introduced a bill to affect our elections going forward, and then did, for 18 months, nothing. Didn't bring the bill for debate, didn't talk about it. Also 18 months ago, we were given notice that the Chief Electoral Officer was leaving. And for 18 months, we didn't have anything until we had a name a few weeks ago, which was then changed to another name that we now have, the government has decided to make public. My question is for my friend across the way. One of the great concerns we had about the Unfair Elections Act, as he rightly points out, I believe was an attempted voter suppression by the previous government, was that the government of the day did two things. One is they moved unilaterally. Only the government ended up supporting legislation that affects all parties and all Canadians. Second is they shut down debate on the bill almost immediately. So I'm looking for a commitment here today from the Minister. Don't do it. Don't repeat the mistakes of the past. Incredibly cynical parties in the past have chosen to try to suppress the vote here and suppress the voices here in the House of Commons. Liberals were critical when they sat on this side. I'm looking for a direct commitment from the Minister not to follow the same path. Do not limit debate on this bill. Make sure that we can allow members to speak, and do not proceed.
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question and his engagement on the whole area of electoral reform. As he has indicated, he agrees, and the NDP have expressed in principle support for much of what is in this bill, particularly for the components of this bill that reflect the report of Elections Canada after the last election. 85% of which are in this bill, particularly for those that reverse some of the more regressive measures of the Conservatives' so-called Fair Elections Act. The member has also expressed concern that I share in terms of making sure that these changes are in place to be in effect for the next election. So given that, number one, there's been a lot of study, I believe 30 hours at PROC around this issue, so at some point we're sawing sawdust. And secondly, that the honourable member has expressed concerns of having this in place for the next election. If you put those two together, Mr. Speaker, we would very much appreciate his support and the NDP's support for moving forward in good faith in a timely way to make sure that the new...
Order. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Perth Wellington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The minister talked about using the voter information card and reinstituting that as a form of identification. But the question is, in the last election, 986,613 voter information cards were reported to have inaccurate information, sent to wrong addresses, have erroneous information. So can the minister address why he's using something as much as 1 million voters got inaccurate information? Why is he then using that as a piece of identification for voters?
Great question.
President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, one of the recommendations from Elections Canada, having had the opportunity to analyze the impact of the changes the previous government did in eliminating vouching and voter information cards, was that we bring back voter information cards. The experts, in fact, I mentioned earlier, over 160 experts on elections felt it was the wrong decision, and Stats Canada has said that, in fact, 170,000 Canadians who ought to have been able to vote did not have the opportunity as a result of that. We believe democracy is stronger when more Canadians participate, and that's why we're bringing it back.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Dans les années 80 et tôt dans les années 90, le gouvernement Mulroney a mis en...
The Mulroney government set up the Lortie reform, and the Jean Chrétien government followed up with that, and followed up with a lot of its recommendations by reforming the electoral funding system, and drastically changing the rules for financing. They very much cleaned up the election funding system in Canada.
The mission of consensus was largely abandoned, unfortunately, in the last Parliament, not once, not twice, but several times, by the Harper government, who retroactively changed election laws, laws respecting leadership campaigns and so on, and suppressed votes. I think that is the one thing that most Canadians took extreme offense to, was the suppression of votes, and particularly the suppression of young people's votes. Can this minister tell us how he is correcting that historic error by encouraging and getting more Canadian youth to vote?
Minister for Democratic Institutions.
Honourable Member, Parliamentary Secretary to Public Services and Procurement Canada, his question. Again, we believe very strongly that having more Canadians active in the political process, including in elections, is really important and vital for our democracy. And that really starts with young Canadians. And to have a registry of future voters and to engage young Canadians early and to give them an opportunity to work in elections is really important. And to restore the ability and indeed the mandate of Elections Canada to actually promote engagement and to do outreach, we think makes a great deal of sense, and that's why it's in this bill.
Last question, the Honourable Member for Joliette. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the President of the Treasury Board for his speech. You know, obviously, we would have preferred to have a bill tabled earlier. The president of the Treasury Board said that he wanted the bill to be passed quickly so that it could be implemented before the next election. We would have preferred to see it earlier. We would have preferred it to be more substantive as well. And we would have liked it to include the option of proportional vote. Obviously, that idea was abandoned despite the unanimous decision of the committee. We always would have liked to see something about public financing, which was not in this bill. Better political funding could certainly remove the perception of political influence. So my question for the President of the Treasury Board has to do with the youth vote. Often students are signed up to vote in the riding where their parents live, but they actually live in a different riding where their university is. So it's difficult for them to vote. So I'd like to ask the President of the Treasury Board which measures are included in C-76 that would facilitate voting for those students who live in a different riding. Thank you. The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, very much appreciate the question. Again, it's very important to increase flexibility for voters so that they can participate in the democratic process. At the same time, we need to protect the integrity of our electoral system.
Or the vouching, as an example, is one area of flexibility. He raises a very good point in that students sometimes who are whose addresses are sometimes transient in terms of living in a different place, to have the opportunity. And again, the vouching requires an individual to make a solemn pledge and take an oath as to somebody's identity. It's not something that is entered into frivolously, and you can only vouch for one person. But that is one example of, and I'd be interested certainly to ensure that young people who are not living at their parents' address or studying, to provide that flexibility, I think is one example of where voter information cards or vouching actually provides a necessary and important flexibility to ensure that they do have the opportunity to vote. Thank you.
I thank all our honourable members for their cooperation in that. We went a couple of minutes over, but the minister was a little short in his 20-minute speech, so he allowed a little bit more time for some questions, and a very, very good participation in that regard. Resuming debate, and the honourable member for Perth Wellington.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it is an honor to rise today and to participate in the debate on Bill C-76, the amendments to the Canada Elections Act. Now, one of the privileges that we have in Canada and as Canadians is to participate in free and fair elections, and I don't think there's anyone in this House would disagree with the importance of that privilege and honor that we have as Canadian citizens to participate in our democratic rights. However, this government has shown its inability to properly introduce legislation and undertake changes to our elections. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the acting Chief Electoral Officer made it very clear to Parliament and to committee that in order for Elections Canada to make the changes necessary for the next election in 2019, legislation had to receive royal assent by April 2018. And here we are in May, only just kicking off debate on this matter. In fact, on April 24th, 2018, at committee, the acting Chief Electoral Officer, Stéphane Perron, had this to say, the Procedure and House Affairs Committee. Quote, "When I appeared last February, I indicated that the window of opportunity to implement major changes in time for the next election was rapidly closing. That was not a new message. Both Monsieur Méran and I had previously indicated that legislative changes should be enacted by April 2018. This means that we are now at a point where the implementation of new legislation will likely involve some compromises. Later in his comments, he said, and again, I quote, "However, it is also my responsibility to inform you that the time is quickly running out. Canadians trust Elections Canada to deliver robust and reliable elections, and we do not want to find ourselves in a situation where the quality of the electoral process is impacted." Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker, the government tabled Bill C-76 in April 2018, the same day legislation was supposed to be in place. The current government has botched the entire process from the tabling of, concerning the tabling of this bill. Because of their mismanagement, the government had to introduce this omnibus bill in order to play catch-up and to distract from past failures. Following the 2015 election, the Chief Electoral Officer provided recommendations for legislative reforms following the 42nd general election. The Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs was reviewing the recommendations and preparing a report for this House. And then, on November 24th, 2016, before the committee had completed its work, the former Minister of Democratic Institutions introduced Bill C-33, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act and to make consequential amendments to other acts, before the report from the committee was completed. She introduced a bill with incomplete information and showed tremendous disrespect to the work of that committee.
Sweet.
Then, after rushing to create a bill, and doing so creating a flawed bill, the government stalled. They sat on the bill, and a year and a half later, they have not once brought it forward for debate at second reading. Add to this their failed attempt to change Canada's electoral system to favor their party. The flawed Bill C-50 and the tremendous delay to appoint a permanent chief electoral officer. And it's clear that the bill is a colossal disappointment. They waited well beyond the deadline of April 2018, and then they introduced the omnibus bill C-76.
Monsieur le Président.
And, Mr. Speaker, Bill C-76 is an omnibus bill. It has 350 pages. Bill C-76 contains hundreds of different sections, and at best, it contains 7 vastly different elements. Many of these elements are baseless or flawed, and not only will they not improve our elections, in some cases, they will, in fact, weaken them.
To one of the key points contained in this bill, and that is the subject of identification. This government is clearly out of touch with what is reasonable in the 21st century. Today, photo ID and identification with one's address is commonly and routinely used for interactions with governments at all levels, whether it's federal, provincial, or municipal. Under the current law, there are nearly 50 different types of identification that are permitted to allow a Canadian voter to prove their identity and prove their address. And Canadians are used to using identification. In Canada, no one bats an eye when they're required to show ID to board an airplane. No one bats an eye when they're required to show ID to prove their age when they buy alcohol or tobacco. Students are regularly required to show ID when they take Via Rail to get the student discount. When we drive a car, we need a driver's license. When we go fishing, we have a fishing license. When you go to get a prescription for medication, you show identification. Even to borrow a library book, you need a library card, which I might add, Mr. Speaker, in most municipalities is free. And what's more, Mr. Speaker, when you go to get that library card, you can also use that as one of the acceptable forms of ID with Elections Canada. Now, I'm proud to have a library card from both the Wellington County libraries and the libraries in Perth County, and I use them regularly, and I would encourage all Canadians to go out to their local libraries and do so. But let's look at the list. Let's look at the list of some of the identification that is currently approved by Elections Canada. Of course, your driver's license or a piece of provincial or territorial ID card. In Ontario, that includes both your photo ID as well as your address on those cards. But other identification as well. The Canadian passport, a birth certificate, a label on a prescription container. Now, it's been mentioned before that perhaps those living in a retirement home or a long-term care home may have a challenge finding identification. But I would challenge anyone to show a senior who may be living in a long-term care home who wouldn't have perhaps a pill bottle or a prescription that would have their name and identification on it. Or, in another case, an identity bracelet issued by a hospital or long-term care facility. A credit card, a debit card, an employee card. The minister talked about students. Nearly every student at a high school in Canada, at a college or a trade school or a university has a student card. Most students also have a bus pass, a public transportation card. Now, it's unfortunate the Liberals got rid of the public transit tax credit, but nonetheless, most students do have a transit card, particularly if they don't have a driver's license. A license or card issued for fishing, trapping, or hunting, one of the great pastimes here in Canada. A utility bill, whether that be electricity, water, telecommunications, cable, or satellite. And what's more, Mr. Speaker, they also accept either e-statements or e-invoices for that type of ID. And in a growing technological world, I know that many of us receive our bills solely online, and that's an acceptable form of ID. A personal check, a government statement of benefits, an income tax assessment. All Canadians are required to file their taxes every year. April 30th was just upon us, and I'm sure all Canadians remember that well with this Liberal government in power.
That's right.
Correspondence issued by a school, college, or university. Again, a student going to college or university in Canada would potentially have that letter from a university. Or barring that, a letter of confirmation of residence from a place such as a student residence for those attending university, a senior's residence or long-term care home, a shelter, or a soup kitchen, so that those who may not have a permanent fixed address would still have an opportunity to have confirmation of their eligibility to vote. And there is also the option as well, Mr. Speaker, a third option, in which an oath can be taken to provide for the confirmation of one's address of someone within the same electoral district undertaking that confirmation. Mr. Speaker, most Canadians would see these rules as reasonable and fair and are a method to ensure that only those who are eligible electors vote, and that they vote in the correct riding. Canadians are rule-loving people. We respect the rules, and we do so. And when we are asked to prove that we are, in fact, a legitimate voter within an electoral district in Canada, we are happy to do so. Which brings me to the government's decision to use the voter information card as identification. Let me say that again. It's a voter information card, not a voter identification card, and is often said by members across the way. They're information cards because that's what they provide. They provide information. And it has been stated before that in the 2015 election, 986,613 of these voter information cards had inaccurate information, were sent to wrong addresses, and were not complete. But yet, these Liberals are okay with nearly 1 million voter information cards being used as identification. And Canadians know that things change. Addresses change. And the voters list is not always entirely up to date. But yet, nonetheless, they are relying on that information to be used to confirm residence within a riding. The challenge as well, Mr. Speaker, or one of the challenge with the voters list and using the voter information card, is that much of this information comes from the Canada Revenue Agency. I would cite a couple of examples where the CRA has mistakenly declared people dead. And yet this information is now being used to inform the voters list and then the voter information card, which then entitles people to vote. I would draw your attention, Mr. Speaker, to an article from November 2017 in which a Scarborough woman was declared dead and her estate was sent her tax refund for nearly $2,800. Another example recently from the CBC in April 2018 talked of a Cape Breton man whose error on the tax return declared both him and his late wife dead, despite the fact that he never submitted, obviously, a death certificate for himself. But yet again, this information is being used to inform the voter information cards, which these Liberals now want to use as a confirmation of an address. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Minister has also said that they will be removing the restrictions of those living outside of Canada from voting, removing the 5-year limitation, and also removing the intent to return to Canada. I will make 2 points on this matter, Mr. Speaker. First, it might be reasonable for Canadians who want to see this country prosper, want to see this country thrive, to at least have an indication that they at some point in the future wish to return and live in this great country we call Canada. And second, that when we look at our Commonwealth cousins, if we look at the example of Commonwealth countries around the world, they too have similar provisions in place. In the United Kingdom, a national who leaves for more than 15 years is not eligible to vote in a national election. And in Australia, this length of time is 6 years, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to talk briefly about foreign financing. And this Liberal government tries to claim that they're shutting the door on foreign financing, that they're blocking foreign influence in elections. But Mr. Speaker, what's actually happening is that they're opening up a great big loophole that will allow foreign influence to funnel large amounts of money into U.S.-style super PACs to be distributed within Canada during election campaigns. I draw your attention, Mr. Speaker, to a recent article by John Ivison. And he writes, in the last election, foreign money wielded by political advocacy groups targeted Conservative candidates. Lead Now claimed its 6,000 volunteers helped defeat 25 Tories. Lead Now said no international money went towards the campaign. However, the New York-based Tides Foundation donated $795,300 to a BC-based nonprofit called the Sisu Institute Society, which in turn donated to Lead Now. Lead Now acknowledges Sisu contributed grants for its other campaigns, but said the election campaign was funded entirely from Canadian sources. Yet, as Duff Conacher at Democracy Watch pointed out, this is nonsense. Any grant frees up other money. It's all in one pot. There is nothing in the new bill to stop this from happening again. End quote. Another example comes from our good friend Andrew Coyne, who wrote, "But let's examine those much-hyped measures to protect and defend Canadian democracy. For example, we are told the bill will prohibit foreign entities from spending any money to influence elections. Wonderful, you say. How much were they allowed to spend until now? 500. But then, the real scandal, to borrow Michael Kinsley's phrase, is not what is illegal, direct foreign spending to Canadian elections, but what's legal. Foreign money by the millions funneled through Canadian intermediaries, which pass it on to domestic advocacy groups to spend. Mr. Speaker, this is wrong, and Canadians understand that this is not the way that Canadian elections ought to be run. Creating loopholes that you can drive a Mack truck through, allowing foreign influence in Canadian elections, is wrong, Mr. Speaker, and Canadians understand that. Canadians understand so much of what this Liberal government is doing in this bill is wrong. Canadians believe that you should be required to prove your identity before you vote. Canadians believe that proper identification is necessary before you vote in an election. Canadians believe that foreign influence in Canadians' elections is wrong and that loopholes should not be allowed in this bill, as these Liberals have done so. Canadians also wonder about the lack of urgency of this Liberal government. We've known for a year and a half that we would need a chief electoral officer, and yet they waited 18 months to do so. They introduced Bill C-33 and let it languish on the order paper. And now, at a point in time in which the Liberal government has been told directly by the Chief Electoral Officer that they do not have time to implement the changes that the Liberals are proposing, they're going ahead anyway with this information. So it's for this reason, Mr. Speaker, that I move, seconded by the member for Kitchener-Conestoga, that the motion be amended by deleting all the words after the word "that" and substituting the following. The House declines to give second reading to Bill C-76, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act and other acts, and to make certain consequential amendments. Since the bill fails to address the high error rate in the National Register of Electors and the high rate of erroneous voter information cards reported at 986,613 instances in the 2015 election, and does nothing to deal with foreign interference in Canadian elections because the bill proposes to double the total maximum third-party spending amount allowed during the writ period and to continue to allow unlimited contributions in the period prior to the pre-writ period. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Nader, seconded by Mr. Albrecht, moves that the motion to be amended by deleting all the words after the word "that" and substituting the following. The House declines to give second reading to Bill C-76, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act and other acts, and to make certain consequential amendments since the bill fails to address the high error rate in the National Register of Electors and the high rate of erroneous voter information cards reported at 986,613 instances in the 2015 election, and does nothing to deal with foreign interference in Canadian elections because the bill proposes to double the total maximum third-party spending amount allowed during the writ period and to continue to allow unlimited contributions in the period prior to the pre-writ period. All seems in order. Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Dorval-Lachine-LaSalle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What this legislation does is to get youth more involved in the electoral process, and I think it's a good thing when our youth are involved in our democracy. So I would like to ask my colleagues across the way, why are they now opposing the Youth Electors Registry when at committee they supported it? Thank you.
Member for Perth Wellington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to say that we all encourage young people to vote. You know, I'm always honored in my campaign to have young people out there, young enthusiastic people. A lot of times, those who can't even yet vote are coming out to help me on my campaigns. On my riding association, I have a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old who are super eager and excited. And we are all going to encourage young people to vote. But let's go back to the point that I raised in my speech about identification. The Liberals keep throwing back to the point that young people, that students don't have identification. But as we've clearly shown, nearly 50 types of eligible identification is permissible for those students, including student ID cards or a letter from a college, university, or institution such as that. We need to encourage young people to vote, and we as a party and we as parliamentarians will be doing all we can as candidates in the next election to encourage young people to vote. And I would encourage the Liberals to do the same rather than trying to change introduce a 350 page omnibus elections bill that has clearly been shown by the Chief Electoral Officer, and it's been stated clearly that it should have been introduced and passed by last month, but yet here we are only just beginning debate today.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was looking forward to this debate because we've been waiting so long for it. That we had clear indications from Elections Canada as to the terms of the timing in which they needed new legislation to have passed both the House of Commons and the Senate and receive royal recommendation to be law. Elections Canada warned this government more than a year ago that this was required. I'm not sure that my friend's efforts to amend the bill in the way that he has is really going to help us along the path. Someone once said that a lack of effort on their part doesn't create a crisis on our part. I asked the Treasury Board Secretary earlier if he would commit to not fast-tracking the bill, shutting down debate, because it's very large, 350 pages. It's incredibly complex. It also deals with constitutional rights like freedom of speech and access to the Canadian electoral system. My basic question is this, though. If the Conservatives are only going to offer to try to derail the bill, I'm not sure that it sets us up well for the 2019 election. This bill was introduced by the Liberal government on the very day that Elections Canada had told them they needed legislation passed. Canadians can be rightfully quite cynical and skeptical as to whether Liberals are truly committed to fulfilling their promises to the changes that they ran on in the last campaign. So I'm wondering to my friend, the specific amendment that he's moved, what is the effort and what eventual goal do the Conservatives have in progressing the conversation around our democracy?
We're at the end of our time. I'll let the Honourable Member for Perth Wellington answer in 30 seconds or less, please, if he doesn't mind.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I agree with the member from Skeena-Bulkley Valley on one particular point, that these Liberals really can't be trusted to actually implement what they ran on. They ran on one policy and then, of course, in the end, failed to deliver on so many of the policies that they actually introduced. The purpose of the amendment was clear. This is a flawed piece of legislation, and we don't believe that we should proceed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
When the debate continues, returns, the Honourable Member for Perth Wellington will have approximately 5 minutes coming back to him for further questions and comments. It being 5:30, the House will now proceed to the consideration of private members' business as listed on today's order paper. Orders of the day.
Private members' business, consideration at report stage of Bill C-326, an act to amend the Department of Health Act drinking water guidelines in the name of Mr. Scarpellegia.
There being no motions at report stage, the House will now proceed without debate to putting the question on the motion to concur in the bill at report stage. Monsieur Scarpellegia.
Mr. Scarpellegia, seconded by Mr. Casey, Charlottetown, moves that Bill C-326, an act to amend the Department of Health Act drinking water guidelines, as amended, be concurred in at report stage.
Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Yes. I believe we have all those in favor, please say yay. Yay. All those opposed, please say nay. Nay. I believe the yeas have it. Pursuant to standing order... Oops.
Just make sure that 5.
Oh, sorry, 1, 2, 3. Here we've got 5. Pursuant to Standing Order 98, the Recorded Division stands deferred until Wednesday, May 23, 2018, immediately before the time provided for private members' business. À ce moment-ci, conformément à la...
Pursuant to Standing Order 38, a motion to adjourn the House is deemed to have been moved and seconded at this time. Therefore, the question is that this House do now adjourn.
Member for Calgary Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'm pleased to rise once again this late in the House to bring up an issue that's drawing a lot of attention in my riding, and I have many constituents now asking me about the HoC deal, of course. And I see the Parliamentary Secretary is ready to go to answer my question, and hopefully I'll get an answer, because I know that the deal is supposed to be either confirmed or rejected by the government by end of May. And I'm hoping the Parliamentary Secretary will be able to illuminate this House on some of the considerations that will be going to the decision, or whether he can inform us on whether the government will be doing the right thing, which is rejecting the HoC takeover by a China-controlled state-owned company. Now, we know that there are experts in the national security field who have called into question this entire deal from top to bottom, who have said, and I'm quoting one of them, "It seems to me very difficult for the government to approve the HoC acquisition without incurring significant risks to national security going forward." He added, it would certainly not be my recommendation to allow it to proceed. This is from a former CSIS director who is saying that proceeding with the HoC deal would not be in the national security interests of Canada. And I would tend to agree with him. I brought up in this House this China state-owned company's record in Bangladesh, where it was barred from bidding on contracts because the Bangladeshi government deemed them too corrupt to do business with. I've brought up the point that they've been banned by the World Bank for an extended period of time for bidding on international projects. I brought up the fact that the same China-controlled state-owned company purchased John Holland Group in Australia. And in Australia, that same John Holland Group is now implicated in a fiasco involving a construction of a children's hospital with an asbestos-laden roof, lead in the water, and construction defects amounting to over a $300 million difference between the cost of the projects and what is outstanding. All of these examples point to the fact that the Government of Canada should not proceed with approval of this takeover of HoC. Now, and there's also a lot of other issues that the promoters of the project have said this would inject new capital. That is simply not true. Large-scale construction companies like Aecon or Graham Construction or PCL don't build public infrastructure just because they can. They build it typically on behalf of governments, such as a school, a hospital, or a dam project, with money from that government. So these companies are just transitory. It's a transition of cash between the two. There's no injection of new money. The real concern that national security experts have in this field is that every single one of these large-scale public projects have things like warranties, and companies like Aecon have access to maintenance logs, the entire warranty infrastructure of the particular building or project, so they know how the buildings are maintained, what goes into the buildings, what type of material has been used. So I think the question I have to the Parliamentary Secretary, again, is going to be, can he tell this House whether the Government of Canada will be taking into consideration every single example I have just mentioned before proceeding with this takeover of Aecon by a China state-owned corporation and handing over control to one of the largest, most successful Canadian-based companies, construction companies, to the Chinese Communist Party?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je suis heureux de répondre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to respond to the comments made earlier by the Honourable Member for Calgary Shepherd about foreign investment in Canada. Mr. Speaker, allow me to start by saying that foreign investment has an important role to play in the country's economic development. Our government welcomes foreign investment when there's a net advantage for Canada. Also, our government takes its responsibility to protect Canadians very seriously when it comes to threats to national security. The Investment Act is part of the framework that meets those objectives. Pursuant to the Act, the Minister of Innovation and Economic Development review and approve foreign investments before they are made. In this case, the minister is persuaded that this investment will represent a net economic advantage for Canada. That is the condition for approving foreign investment. Furthermore, the provisions regarding national security indicate that all foreign investment, regardless of their origin or their amount, must be reviewed in order to guarantee that those investments do not undermine Canada's national security. The process for reviewing investments for foreign investment starts as soon as investors indicate their wish to invest. They must provide a great deal of details, namely their trade activities, their main representatives, and the possibility of influence by foreign states. Pursuant to the law, Canadian security agencies analyze all of the information provided by investors. They also investigate elements of evidence and additional information. The Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, the RCMP, the Canadian Intelligence Review Service, the Telecommunications Security Centre, and National Defence all participate. The honourable member referred to a contract in Australia to build a hospital for children. I cannot speak to the execution of that contract. However, I can confirm that the acquisition of HoC is being reviewed pursuant to national security measures under the Canada Investment Act. As indicated in the guidelines regarding the national security of investments, which our government published in December 2016, Canadian entities responsible for security carefully review many factors when conducting a national security review, namely the potential risks for Canada's interests in defense, the transfer of technology that could be considered sensitive, security of Canada's essential infrastructure, any impact on Canada's interest in the world, and possible links with terrorism or organized crime. Mr. Speaker, the law provides a solid framework, which is evidence-based, to thoroughly examine foreign investment in order to determine its net advantage for Canada, as well as potential risks for national security. And we follow this process. Foreign investments done in Canada will only be permitted after a careful review of all evidence and the advice of professionals working for our national security agencies. The Honourable Member for Calgary-Shepherd.
None of what the member said, the Parliamentary Secretary said, makes me actually feel better about the deal, unfortunately. I know that will come as a great surprise to him that I don't quite agree with it. We learned earlier today about the 18-year prison term that the former CEO of Ong Bong is now facing. So there's a Yiddish proverb that goes, never mind the remorse, don't commit the sin. Don't commit the sin. There is no reason to feel remorse a year from now if they approve the HoC deal to then say, well, in retrospect, we regret going through with this, because that's exactly the type of regret that the Australian government is feeling with the John Holland Group takeover by the exact same state-owned company. We know from the Globe and Mail articles have been written on this deal that officials within that department, the government of Canada, have said that this company would not be able to build on the Gordie Howe International Bridge. And now HoC has announced that it will be removing their intentions of bidding on the project. So I asked their parliamentary secretary now, what other projects will they be removed from? Will they be dams, nuclear power plants, hospitals?
Kerry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you again for the additional question. I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, you and all Canadians, that the decisions made under the Act are based on a thorough and careful analysis. This government follows the process set out in legislation and makes evidence-based decisions. We will not compromise Canada's national security for any foreign investment. Due to the confidentiality provisions of the Investment Canada Act, while I can confirm that the proposed acquisition of HoC is currently undergoing a national security review, I cannot comment on specific details of that review. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
It's like putting a serial rapist in charge of a women's shelter. That's how one newspaper described the fact that Syria will chair a UN conference on disarmament later this year. The Syrian regime, with the backing of Iran and Russia, is one of the world's leading violators of human rights in general and violators in terms of the use of illegal weapons to violate human rights in particular. What's striking about this situation with the UN chairing, the Syrian regime chairing this UN conference is that the UN's own investigations clearly show the illegal targeting of civilians with illegal chemical weapons by the Syrian regime. Now, the fact that this has happened at all, the fact that these attacks on civilians with chemical weapons has happened at all, is a grave challenge to the credibility of the international system. So I am glad that there was a punitive response taken by our allies. Yet the UN's investigative bodies have identified this, have pointed the finger at Syria at the same time as the UN is going to welcome Syria to chair the UN Conference on Disarmament. And that operates under and reports to the UN General Assembly. The conference meeting will start on May the 28th. And this is a pattern we see in different UN entities, where some of the worst violators of human rights in general, and in particular cases, will seek positions of influence involving human rights at the UN, will seek positions of influence in the particular area where they are violating those rights, in hopes of preventing or at least dampening criticism of their own activities. We saw this, for example, with the Saudi government getting a position on the UN Women's Rights Commission. Now, there have been some changes made in Saudi Arabia, we should acknowledge, but there is a heck of a lot more work to do when it comes to women's rights and other human rights issues. And at the time, I asked our Minister of Foreign Affairs, I think it was a fairly simple question, did she think that it was a good thing or a bad thing that Saudi Arabia was on the UN Women's Rights Commission? The response we got from her, I asked the question multiple times, was to explain some of the context around the selection, but not to actually answer the specific question. Now, I know that all members of this House believe that the UN plays an important role in the world, but I want to say to the government that appropriate criticism of these kinds of things, of the way in which some authoritarian regimes use UN human rights bodies to try and whitewash their own abuses. Appropriate criticism of that pattern of behavior is the pro-UN thing to do. If one cares about the UN, if one cares about the integrity of international institutions, then I think it is necessary to speak out and criticize and act when you have these kinds of negative outcomes. It is with an eye to reforming, improving the UN, making it better, that we should clearly identify when these perverse outcomes happen. Being pro-UN doesn't mean accepting these kinds of clearly unacceptable aspects of current processes as being something that has to be in place going forward. So I want to ask the government again, because I don't think we got a clear answer to this question originally. We got comments about the situation in Syria in general, but I would like to ask the government very specifically, and they've had notice of this question, so they know this is coming. Will they be boycotting this conference, given that Canada in the past has boycotted this conference when it's been chaired by rogue states? Will Canada do the right thing on May 28th and going forward and boycott a disarmament conference chaired by Syria? Thank you.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And once again, I want to thank my honourable colleague for his passion and advocacy for human rights. And let me say that our government is dismayed and appalled that Syria will take on the presidency of the Conference on Disarmament. We believe that it is inappropriate for Syria to take this presidency. In fact, 2 or almost 3 weeks ago now, when the ministers of foreign affairs of the G7 met in Toronto, the conversation was initiated by our Minister of Foreign Affairs on this matter, and there was a quote, let me quote the communique that came out of the conference, the G7 conference, quote, "We deplore the fact that Syria will assume the presidency of the Conference on Disarmament in May, given its consistent and flagrant disregard of international non-proliferation and disarmament norms and agreements. End of quote. We will continue, Mr. Speaker, to publicly denounce this development, and we have been calling on the conference to change its rules of procedure to prevent countries which violate their disarmament obligations from holding the rotating presidency. We also call on countries to voluntarily recuse themselves when they know that they have not been upholding their international obligations. So I want to assure the honourable member that our government is seized by this issue, and we have been publicly and diplomatically raising it with our allies, with like-minded countries, with members of the UN. And I also want to make a distinction, Mr. Speaker. We, of course, know that the UN can work better, and we want to see the UN improve and reform itself. But there's a difference between raising cynicism about the institution or being constructively contributing to reforming the UN, and that's, Mr. Speaker, where I see the difference between myself and my colleague. Thank you.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, we raised this issue not to create cynicism, but to point to the reality. And people are going to respond to that reality in different ways. My hope is that this leads to constructive action. But, you know, sometimes we have to be tough on international institutions. And that includes a willingness to boycott conferences that are clearly too compromised. With all due respect to my colleague, he said some things that I think are worthwhile about the G7 communique, but he did not answer the specific question, which is, if Syria remains in the presidency position, if these reforms don't happen as they are fortunately being sought, will Canada be willing to actually clearly send a statement by boycotting that conference? You know, voluntarily asking Syria to voluntarily recuse itself from this discussion is not a realistic approach. Syria wants to be in this decision precisely because it wants to do criticism of its own record. So I asked the Parliamentary Secretary to answer this question. Will Canada be willing to boycott the convention if change does not happen here?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, I want to remind my colleague with this phrase, don't confuse politeness with weakness. He defines toughness with being vulgar or belligerent. My definition of toughness is being constructive and being clear and sometimes blunt, but in a constructive way. As to his question about what we will do, he will understand that we will keep our options open. We're not going to reveal our options today until the time comes to it. For now, we have been very clear about calling on Syria not to take the presidency, asking our allies to support that, and asking the conference to reform itself. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagot.
The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagot. Mr. Speaker, I rose in the House in February to ask the government to reassure provinces and municipalities about their plan for infrastructure and the infrastructure bank. I have to admit, Mr. Speaker, that even if the minister responsible for infrastructure and communities recently updated us on Phase 1, I still am not reassured. The Parliamentary Budget Officer informed us in March that half of the amount set aside for Phase 1 in infrastructure had not been spent or even attributed. The minister said that nearly 80% of the amount had been spent. Nonetheless, that means at least 20%, $2.6 billion, has not been spent. Recently, an article from the magazine L'Actualité reported that provinces are asking Ottawa for more flexibility in the way that federal subsidies are invested, namely the ability to replace part of their own contributions with the federal contribution. In my riding, there is a project that is essential for the local economy and local businesses in Saint-Hyacinthe and Acton Vale. This project is to replace the railway bridge at the railway crossing that crosses the Trans-Canada Highway. The Quebec Minister for Transportation confirmed at the beginning of the year that this project is a priority, but it does not fit into any current federal grant. Mr. Speaker, last Monday, the Standing Committee for Agriculture and Agri-Food came through my riding. For me, Saint-Hyacinthe is an essential stop to make. That's why, during this pan-Canadian visit, the committee stopped at HoC, a business that works in the field of animal food additives and has been in the business for 35 years. From its very beginnings, Jean Fontaine and now his family have been able to seize opportunities and develop a vision that benefit local agricultural producers, and also benefits producers throughout the world, because HoC is part of the agricultural world. Visiting HoC's campus was extremely useful to learn more about the field of animal nutrition. During this visit, Jean Fontaine and Jean-François Fontaine were able to convince us that their projects and the expansion of HoC is certainly not over yet. I am proud that Technopole Alimentaire in Saint-Hyacinthe distinguished itself through one of its entrepreneurs, the private company HoC, which is the only one to offer the capacity to receive or expedite an amount through 100 train wagon loads throughout the entire province. However, Jean Fontaine and Jean-François Fontaine also told us just how important the railway bridge at the current railway crossing that crosses the Trans-Canada Highway is a priority for the development and expansion of HoC and businesses in my riding. This project is a real necessity to ensure the safety of citizens in the region, but is also a significant asset for the economic development of Saint-Hyacinthe and the surrounding area. Since I have been elected, I've held dozens of meetings with my federal, provincial, and municipal colleagues, as well as representatives of Canadian National, to ensure that this project is done. We need to hear the provinces who are asking for more flexibility in the way that federal grants are invested. Will this government grant provinces and municipalities the flexibility they're asking for to choose infrastructure projects that are important for their communities? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Infrastructure and Communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, this might be a bit late, but I wish to congratulate the new critic for infrastructure. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to congratulate her in her new role, even though this is not new. Although she comes from a party that is called a new party, and that's not new either. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to respond directly to the question raised by my colleague. Our historic investment of $180 billion in infrastructure is something that represents twice what we invested in infrastructure before. These are projects that will be transformational. And they will be done with the provinces and municipalities while respecting their jurisdictions and their priorities. I'm sure my colleague knows that setting priorities, whether it be in Phase 1 or Phase 2, for infrastructure when it comes to traditional investments, is done above all by the provinces. Audits and other checks are done by provincial ministries that have the experience necessary to deal with these projects. Therefore, it is easy for me to say that, yes, indeed, I can rise and say that we are going to respect the jurisdiction of provinces and Indigenous communities. That is what we had said we would do during the electoral campaign, and that's a promise that we are keeping.
This is an important aspect of our infrastructure, our Investing in Canada plan, Mr. Speaker. The respect of provinces' jurisdictions and their priorities is at the heart of the bilateral agreements that we are currently negotiating, 7 of which have been concluded positively to date, and the remaining are in the final stages and are to come. It is precisely for that reason, Mr. Speaker, that we've taken our time to negotiate in good faith with provinces and territories, making sure that there is flexibility where it is necessary for provinces to invest. We are at the same time, and it's important to remember because it is an important part, Mr. Speaker, of our investing plan. We're actually asking provinces and municipalities to put up money as well, so their needs and prioritizations in terms of capital investments as well as their 5-10-year plans need to be examined, respected, and then negotiated with the provinces. And I'm very happy to announce that we've concluded the majority of them to date. When it comes to the question that my honourable colleague mentioned about the infrastructure bank, again, it's important to reiterate that this is an optional tool that will see us investing $35 billion from federal government into projects that generate revenue in tandem and in cooperation with private capital, so that we deploy and invest in those assets now, where and when it's needed. So, again, to conclude, Mr. Speaker, it is with great pleasure that I stand here and remind and confirm to the member opposite that respect of the provinces and of their priorities is top of mind, and it is key in making sure that these assets are properly deployed and invested in. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Mr. Speaker, when we announce a historic investment of $180 billion, we create a very high level of expectation. I represent 25 municipalities who listened to that announcement and who thought that because they had a clear vision for the new infrastructure they need, updating existing infrastructure, plans for the next 10 years. Same thing for the provinces. They have a 5-year plan. They know exactly what they want. And the needs are even more vast than what is being offered every year by the federal government. The needs are vast. Municipalities are asking us for funding that is predictable. They see it in other types of funding, like the gas tax, which allows them to calculate what's coming. They also need funding that is for large cities and small municipalities, too. I sincerely hope that all of the agreements, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's very important to highlight the fact that, yes, again, over the last 10 years, or even longer, underfunding of capital investments in infrastructure in our country. And yes, we've announced this transformational project of $180 billion to build Canada for the 21st century. Of course, expectations are high, but we're putting money into it, and it is with great pride that I can confirm that municipalities that have been waiting for some time to see their community centre updated, to see their projects done, will have their funding confirmed. And it's one of the greatest sources of pride to talk to mayors of small cities who can't invest in infrastructure, who are being told by the federal government that they will get this funding. I'm looking forward to making announcements along with my colleague in her riding. The motion that the House do adjourn is now deemed to have been adopted. The House is adjourned until tomorrow at 10 a.m. pursuant to Standing Order 24-1.